And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will my car insurance rates increase if I park my car on the roof of this flooded house?
Yeah.
And since the FDA has now approved the Pfizer vaccine, could my healthcare provider inject it straight into my earlobe?
Yeah, baby.
And now, the podcast host who furiously plugs leaky roofs like St. Joseph with superglue, Pete Dominic.
Yeah, Pico is back. I am here with you, and I am very happy to have you here with me. Thank you very much for checking out today's show. Oh my goodness, is it a good one. For those of you who are fans of Matt Jones, listening to this show for the first time, welcome. Thanks very much for tuning in. So excited to have Matt on. An amazing conversation. Thought we were really funny. I thought it was very interesting. It was provocative. We mixed it up pretty good. We argued a good bit. Matt is a sports radio and political talk guy in Kentucky, and he's a lot more than that, too. He's an author. He's an entrepreneur. He owns a pro wrestling league. Fascinating guy. You're going to love it. And that starts at about 33 minutes in. And after my conversation with Matt Jones, I have retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General who won 5 bronze medals and the Combat Action Badge. Retired General Daniel Bolger joins me to talk about his book, Why We Lost, a General's Inside Account of the Iraq and Afghanistan Wars. Matt Jones and retired Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger both join me on today's episode of Stand Up. Before I get to the news, I want to update you on my potential write-in campaign for town council in Clarkstown, New York, where I live. I had several conversations today about it. I'm getting very excited about the idea. And just to give a heads up, a few of you have reached out and said, well, I want to support you, but I love the show. And I just, for the greater good, yeah, but I hope you wouldn't take away from the show. In fact, I'm investing more time into the show. Believe it or not, I've figured out how to be as efficient as I can. I've been scheduling interviews. I've been doing everything better to manage my time so I can host this show and try to get 2 guests every day and even still do the news segment every night, put it all together for you to listen to, usually post around 2 a.m. at the latest. So not only am I going to potentially run for town council, I'm going to do more here with the show. So I'm really excited about that and telling you all about that really soon. But yeah, great conversations. Getting really excited about the idea. If anybody wants to talk about it, wants to give me advice, wants to share ideas, then, and as soon as if I decide to do it, put up a site that you can donate a couple bucks to the campaign so I can print out some signs and stuff. That'd be awesome. But really, I just want to talk about it in terms of trying to be transparent about what it takes to run for something. Run for Something is one of the nonprofits, one of the people that runs it, founded Amanda Lippman, that inspired me to do this. Not that anybody said I should do this, other than my neighbors who reached out to me and literally asked me to do it. It wasn't even my idea. I didn't even know there was an election because I've been so apathetic. But no more. I'm involved, I'm learning, and I'm really excited meeting and getting to know my neighbors and all the passionate, motivated folks where I live about important issues. Get involved with local politics. If you've done it, reach out to me right now and share with me your experience. I'm standupwithpete@gmail.com. Email me. All right, now let's get to the news and then both of my guests. Starting with the last 24 is what I call it. What happened in the last day? I got some audio clips for you, as I always do, mostly related to COVID developments, because the big news, of course, yesterday is that the FDA gave full approval to the Pfizer vaccines, and, the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson, I'm sure, are going to follow, but with full approval comes potential more credibility for the mandates, and a lot to discuss around that. But first, I just want to play for you Crazy Alex Jones, who's done as much, if not more, damage to our culture and what we all once agreed to some extent was a base of reality than anybody else. All right, here he is, Alex Jones. Watch out. None too happy with Trump promoting the vaccine in Alabama to a bunch of people that were actively getting COVID standing in an empty field. Hopefully I'm wrong about that.
But I recommend take the vaccine.
There's Trump in Alabama yesterday.
I believe totally in your freedoms. I do. You got to do what you have to do. But I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good. Take the vaccines. But no, that's okay. That's all right. You got your freedoms. But I happen to take the vaccine. If it doesn't work, you'll be the first to know, okay? I'll call up Alabama. I'll say, hey, you know what? But it is working.
BS. Trump, that's a lie. You're not stupid.
Yes, he is, and so are you.
Just 2 weeks ago, they said it was 65%, then 40%. Saw a number put up about Pfizer shots, 30-something%.
You're making things up.
Because they just want to tell you it doesn't work, so you're running at the new damn shot. And then they'll tell you in 6 months that one doesn't work. It's called rope-a-dope.
Nope.
Shame on you, Trump. Seriously. Hey, if you don't have the good sense to save yourself and your political career, that's okay. At least you're going to get some good Republicans elected. And, we like you, but my God. Maybe you're not that bright. Maybe Trump's actually a dumbass. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Alex Jones, who has a media empire still somehow. I wonder what the copyright was on that music, which all of you listening know that song, and I don't, because I don't know music. Anyway, Alex Jones losing it on Trump, hilarious to me. And also important from the standpoint that whenever they're criticizing each other, that's good. And now let's get serious, folks. Enough nonsense with the conspiracy theorists. Let's walk into the White House press room where Jen Psaki was also asked about Donald Trump endorsing the vaccine this past weekend.
Jen, what's your reaction to former President Trump this weekend at a rally in Alabama asking his supporters to get vaccinated and then getting booed?
Well, one, we will take anyone who has a big platform out there who wants to encourage people to get vaccinated, doing it. That's a good thing, and we understand that some of the people who are not yet vaccinated are not people who may have Biden-Harris stickers on their cars, and that's okay. In terms of, I think it's just a recognition, as we are very clear-eyed about, that there are still people who are skeptical out there in the country, that there are still people who whether because of misinformation or a range of factors, are not yet getting vaccinated, even though it could save their lives. It means we still have more work to do, and we are committed to doing exactly that. Go ahead.
I feel like that deserves a Family Feud. Good answer, Jen. Really well handled there. And now here is Comedy Central Daily Show's Jordan Klepper, who went to an anti-vax rally in New York City. And here's just you got to watch the whole segment, but here's just a little bit of the sound from, and you got to watch the video as well, from that right now. Jordan Klepper on The Daily Show in the streets of Manhattan at an anti-vax rally.
People are having their DNAs wiped out.
What? What do you mean, like completely wiped out?
Yeah, they're telling women that it's okay for you to get the vaccine.
What does it mean their DNA is wiped out?
Like their immunity is getting wiped out.
Because I was saying, like, COVID wiped out 600,000 DNAs.
Yes, of course, you know?
Actually, some people have died from the vaccine. Don't believe me, go to the media, go to the Google or...
some people have died from COVID.
Yes.
So many more than from the vaccine.
One thing with me, I try not to argue facts.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. This next lady uses air quotes a lot.
From Pennsylvania.
Yes, because we know it's coming to Pennsylvania.
How important is it like that to think ahead to protect something before it gets out of control?
It's everything. It's everything, because once it's gone out of control, you don't reel it in.
Right, like that's why it's important for everybody to get a vaccine, squash it before it gets out of control.
That's why what?
It's important that we take the vaccine, squash it.
Oh my God, what side are you on? Are you nuts?
No, what were you talking about?
I'm not talking to you.
What were you talking about?
I am not for the vaccine. Are you out of your mind?
Well, you were just talking about getting ahead of it.
Getting ahead of the mandate.
The mandate is what's spreading.
Yes. We don't want the mandate to come to PA. We don't want to take the vaccine.
Oh.
Why should I?
You see why I'm confused, though.
All right, there's a lot more. Go watch The Daily Show. Jordan Klepper doing great work, as always. I also shared that one on my Twitter, at Pete Dominic, if you're not following me there, and Instagram, and Facebook and TikTok. I have a TikTok. I posted one TikTok, but I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't even know what the address is. Anyway, I'll figure that out, and someday I'll start using it. Okay, so now let's get to some real expertise, some real science. I thought this was a great interview with Dr. Michael Osterholm, who has been spot on about this pandemic. He's an epidemiologist, I believe, University of Minnesota, and he was on MSNBC. I liked this, and I learned a lot. You got the FDA approval, a lot of questions about that. Let's go.
I think one of the things that isn't really appreciated about these mRNA vaccines, like Pfizer's vaccine, 180 million people have been vaccinated with that vaccine. We have not had a single death associated with the vaccine. You know, aspirin isn't that safe. You know, I'd tell people to be more worried about taking aspirin than this vaccine. So combined with the fact that these are very safe vaccines and they are effective, you know, we're learning now about more breakthroughs. We're also learning that we may need one extra dose to basically get us through that situation. We could do so much to end the kind of horrible, horrible situation we're seeing in this country if people would just get vaccinated.
Based on the fact that you corrected me on the 16-year-old part of this, I feel like I know what you're going to say here. But according to our poll, 69% of respondents said they'd already gotten the vaccine. Only 13% said they definitely wouldn't get the vaccine. I'm not a big math guy, but that leaves about 15% who are somewhat open. So how big of a dent does that FDA approval have to make, is there potential for impact amid that 15%?
I think it's very important. And now people can realize that this vaccine has received the full in-depth review that the FDA would put forward for any other kind of vaccine or drug, and basically has come out on the other end with the full approval of the FDA and showing that it can save thousands and thousands of lives. So I feel very confident that some people will now have that willingness to go forward. We'll still have vaccine holdouts, and that's where I think vaccine mandates still play a very important role. I'm a very big supporter of vaccine mandates, not because I want to tell somebody what to do with their body, but when their body is infectious to others in the community, then that is a community issue. That's not just about them.
So does this FDA approval give companies more solid grounds to enact those mandates?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you as a public health professional for the last 46 years, I think it does. I think it's very compelling that it, in fact, says, yes, now use the power that you have there to try to bring, a major dent into this really horrible situation.
There you go, Dr. Michael Osterholm on MSNBC. The U.S. topped 1,000 daily COVID-19 deaths for the first time since March. India and Taiwan are rolling out domestically produced COVID vaccines despite a lack of trial data. Wow, that's got to be interesting for both those countries and the reaction to that. WHO is now, the World Health Organization, slamming rich nations for offering booster shots while just 2% of Africa's population is vaccinated. That story actually is from a couple of days ago. But I also just wanted to play for you this unbelievable or very believable thing that happened on Fox News yesterday when Dana Perino and Bill Hemmer are co-hosting a segment, and they're talking about the approval of the Pfizer vaccine by the FDA. This headline yesterday that I've been mentioning and playing clips about. And Dana Perino says the critics are saying maybe it happened too fast. And then moments later, Bill Hemmer says, what took so long, to their guest, who is that guy, Brett Giroir, who served as a senior health official in the Trump administration. Here we go. Listen to this.
FDA just giving full approval to Pfizer's COVID vaccine. It's the first vaccine to get that full approval, and in record time, too. That has critics asking if the process was rushed. Was it? Well, let's bring in Admiral Brett Giroir, former Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary, and of course, he was our testing czar. So tell us a little bit, sir, about what this moment means to get full approval.
Well, this is a very big moment in Operation Warp Speed history, in the history of our vaccines, our fight against the pandemic. Prior to this, we had emergency use authorization. What that really meant is that the public health benefits outweighed the known and potential harms. What this says today is we know the benefits, we know the harms, and this vaccine is safe and effective, and every confidence can be given to that. Americans should feel very good, even better than they did yesterday, about getting the vaccine.
Yeah, what took so long?
Well, it is a complicated process, and I know there are many, many good professionals, incredible professionals at the FDA. I was acting commissioner. It does take a while because all the data is looked at in detail. You know, every page is turned, the facilities are inspected.
All right, I just cut them quick back to back. I took out the gas. Too fast? Too slow?
That has critics asking if the process was rushed.
What took so long?
One more time.
That has critics asking if the process was rushed.
What took so long?
Okay, there you go. Fox News doing what Fox News does. I mean, all networks, all journalists, I think people, we contradict each other, maybe from 1 hour to the next at a network or something. But for two people in one, like, 30-second moment to kind of contradict each other, that's rich. You don't get that very often. So there you go. Dr. Fauci made an error on an NPR interview when he was trying to lay out the timeline of where we expect to be with COVID, which is, of course, so depressing. I think that doesn't even need to be said, but I'm happy to, of course, mention it. Anyway, here it is. This is Fauci on CNN with Anderson Cooper. I think this is some interesting and important, but albeit potentially depressing information. Trigger alert. Sad news ahead. Tough forecast ahead.
Anderson, I have to apologize. When I listened to the tape, I meant to say the spring of 2022, so I did misspeak. And in the conversation with Mary Louise Kelly, she was saying, when do I think we're going to start to get some control? I said, if we can get through this winter and get really the majority, overwhelming majority of the 90 million people who have not been vaccinated, I hope we could start to get some good control in the spring of 2022. I didn't mean the fall. I misspoke. My bad.
Okay. What does control, what does that mean, or what does that look like to you?
Well, to me, that means that you have either the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated, those who have been infected will have, and have cleared the virus, will have a degree of protection, and we are recommending that those people also get vaccinated, because the degree of protection that you could induce in someone who's been infected, who has then recovered, and then vaccinated is an enormous increase in the degree of protection. If we could do that with the people who've been infected, get them revaccinated, the people who are unvaccinated now, that 90 million people, get them vaccinated, I think we can get a degree of overall blanket protection of the community that as we get into the early part of 2022, getting through the winter, which could be complicated by influenza, by respiratory syncytial virus, that as we get into the spring, we could start getting back to a degree of normality, namely reassuming the things that we were hoping we could do. Restaurants, theaters, that kind of thing. But again, there's a big caveat there, Anderson. This is a very wily virus. We thought we were going to have that degree of freedom as we got into the 4th of July and the summer. And then along comes a sucker punch with the Delta variant, which is extraordinary in its capability of spreading from person to person. So we hope we'll be there at the time frame that I mentioned, correctly being the spring of 2022. But there's no guarantee, because it's up to us. If we keep lingering without getting those people vaccinated that should be vaccinated, this thing could linger on, leading to the development of another variant, which could complicate things. So it's within our power to get this under control. And what percentage? And that is to get vaccinated.
All right, watch more of that on CNN with Anderson Cooper. And here is President Biden with the announcement. The FDA approval is the gold standard, he said. And here he is. Go to vaccines.gov. That's the background, the backdrop where he was talking here.
Today, we've hit another milestone, a key milestone in our nation's fight against COVID. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, announced it is fully concluded. It's a thorough, independent scientific review After a strict process, the FDA has reaffirmed its findings that the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is safe and effective, and the FDA has given its full and final approval. So let me say this loudly and clearly. If you're one of the millions of Americans who said that they will not get the shot until it has full and final approval of the FDA, it has now happened. The moment you've been waiting for is here. It's time for you to go get your vaccination and get it today. Today.
I wonder how many people will actually see that and go, you know what? Now I'm ready. Now that the FDA has approved it, now I'm ready. All right, and finally, I don't know, I missed this yesterday, but I got to share this with you. This is Governor Andrew Cuomo warning people about the hurricane, which, by the way, we're fine here in New York. It wasn't too bad, at least. I mean, more rain than you've seen ever, but we're okay. But here's Andrew Cuomo warning people and just talking about his last couple days in office. This is pretty outrageous.
Your governor, Andrew Cuomo, and by the way, still your governor for another few days. And we're doing preparations for Hurricane Henri. And notice I pronounced it in the French manner because unlike nasty and vicious stereotypes, people would assume an Italian boy from Queens would not speak with a beautiful flowing French accent. But I like to defy stereotypes, and I like the French. You know, I like the way they kiss, especially, and apparently I can't say that to my interns anymore. Well, for a couple of more days, and then I will be resigning, and then the gloves and condoms will come off as far as how I communicate and interact with my underlings. But we want everybody to get their booties and their rubbers. And by that, of course, I mean boots. I'm not talking about ass cheeks or condoms. Now, a radical left progressive wing who is very against me might want to interpret that differently, but I'm telling you that's not what I mean. So I want everybody to get out there with their umbrellas, okay? And by the way, Rihanna, I like your song Umbrella, and if you were interested in an older, more powerful man, call me. So on top of that, of course, as the little matter of, while I still have executive power, I have decided to sign over the deed to myself for 20 ventilators. So I will be opening up Cuomo's ventilator shop. So get all your Delta needs met at Cuomo's Ventilators.
Oh, dear.
And a small other matter, I will be pardoning myself of all crimes and misdemeanors and what I call a class of activities known as Italian charm and manners. So it's been a pleasure serving you, and I look forward to meeting many of you young women on, it's called Bumble. So we'll see what happens, and have a nice day.
Oh, boy. Oh, the governor's such a dirtbag, isn't he? Also, comedian Jay Alcovan will be performing in New York City, October 23rd, 7 and 9:30 p.m. He's taping his new special, and I'll be warming up for him to get that audience all liquored up, and hopefully we'll have shows and COVID won't be bad. But October 23rd, 7 and 9:30 p.m. for his taping. Okay, let's go now to the news. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the news dump. Hit it, Pete.
Sunbathing roaming cows, tired of tourist chumps, trampling unsuspecting beachgoers on today's news dump.
Oh, oh, God. Cows on the beach trampling people. That's terrible. But give it up for Pete Coe. He's on Twitter. Go tell him how much you love those. At Pete Coe, Coevo. At Pete Coevo. Oh, and by the way, often his jingles are sometimes, they're inspired by real things. Here's the headline. That's real. Beach evacuated after aggressive cows invade and a man is attacked. This happened on the island of Corsica. Marauding cows are driving tourists from beaches and forcing villagers indoors in Corsica, to the dismay of local mayors, to say they have no power to stop them. Go read it at the Times of London, the Sunday Times. I saw this headline that the tallest man in the U.S. has died. His name is Igor Vavkavinsky. He's Ukrainian-born. He lived in Minnesota, and sadly he was only 38 years old. He died of heart disease at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. He was apparently an Obama supporter in 2000. He was on the Dr. Oz show, and he was called out by President Barack Obama during a campaign rally in 2009 when Obama noticed him near the stage wearing a T-shirt that read, "World's Biggest Obama Supporter." And he also, that I mentioned, wore a size 26 shoe. And sad news that he passed away, but he sounded like a really good guy. America's tallest man. I'm not going to try to say his name again, but that's sad. Igor Vavkavinsky. Oh, I did it. Dick Cheney and Donald Trump are still alive. Okay. More quick hits, rapid fire headlines. Another COVID headline, I guess. The Pentagon said Monday that it will require service members to receive the COVID-19 vaccine now that the Pfizer vaccine has received full approval. I repeat, the Pentagon is mandated the COVID-19 vaccine as Pfizer is approved. So that'll be an interesting development to see what happens there. The new Spider-Man trailer is out. I want to mention that. Looks very good. I love Tom Holland. As a result of them shooting themselves in the dick over at Jeopardy, their stupid EP who picked himself to be the host, they are now bringing back guest hosts. So let's see if LeVar Burton gets a nod, or who else? Ken Jennings, a former Jeopardy champion. But where's Laura Coates? Where is Laura Coates? Come on. Twitter suspended the account of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' press secretary for violating rules on, quote, abusive behavior after the Associated Press said her conduct led to a reporter receiving threats and other online abuse. The DeSantis aide, Christina Pushaw, saw her account locked for 12 hours, according to a Twitter spokesman. New research is saying the cutoff of federal unemployment benefits is much of the country was meant to bring a flood of workers back to the job market. So far, that flood looks more like a trickle. That research coming out of several recent studies disproving a very common right-wing talking point that cutting off these unemployment benefits is going to bring a flood of workers back to the job. Yeah, not the case. Total 26 states, all but one with Republican governors, moved to end some or all of the expanded unemployment benefits that had been in place since the pandemic began. The governors, along with many business owners, argue the benefits discourage returning to work when many employers are struggling to hire, but several recent studies have concluded the extra payments played only a tiny role in this year's labor shortages. Read more about it in New York Times story by Ben Castleman. Here's a couple of strange stories. A 46-year-old man, a guy a year older than me, was found dead at the New York Mets home stadium after falling from the second-floor staircase, according to the NYPD. The man was found at Citi Field in Queens after suffering from injuries consistent with a fall from the elevated position. Yikes. Unclear if the situation was accidental. The rock band Dead & Company had a concert on Friday night. It's not clear whether the man fell during the concert. How could this have happened? That's sad and bizarre. Here's another weird story. A racehorse bucked a jockey, escaped the racetrack, and ran full speed on a highway out of town. And I am going to look more into this horse named Bold and Bossy. This is Ellis Park Racetrack in Kentucky. Bold and Bossy is on the highway. She's bucked her jockey, and there she goes. And after being pursued by her trainers as well as police down parts of US 41, a local sheriff finally captured her. Terrible what they do to horses, as far as I know. And finally, on today's news dump, I always try to end with a happy story. A diner at a North Florida restaurant, that Florida, gathered the staff of 10 together to thank them for their hard work before leaving them a $10,000 tip to share. This is in Gainesville, Florida. And it was a real game changer for all of the wait staff that work at the Wahoo Seafood Grill. Very cool story and a great place to end. All right, coming up, retired Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger talks about why we lost in Afghanistan. And before that, one of my favorite interviews I think I've ever done on the podcast with Kentucky Sports Radio's Matt Jones. But before that, I've got to tell you, first of all, thank you to all of my subscribers to this show. I hope to see you Thursday night at the Hangout. Can't do it without you guys. If you haven't signed up, go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. And also, I do have a sponsor for this week and today's show. I'm very happy to tell you that a lot of listeners have taken advantage of Indeed.com. Including Frank Zarinsky. What's up, Frank? He's the founder and CEO of Motion City Media. And Frank has found some great new employees using Indeed because, as they say, with the right people at your company, you'll make headlines for all the right reasons. Without them, your company might just be old news. Screen for quality candidates quickly with assessments from Indeed. When hiring gets hard, you need Indeed, the job site that makes hiring incredibly simple. Just attract, interview, and hire. In fact, with Indeed.com, you can do all of your hiring in one place, even all the interviewing. Don't just hope for your perfect candidate that they're going to find you. Indeed's hiring tools help you cut through the noise to hire faster and smarter. In fact, Indeed Instant Match provides a list of quality candidates whose resumes are on the Indeed the moment you post a sponsored job. With Indeed Assessment, choose from 135 skill tests to help make sure you're finding applications from people with the skills that you need. According to Talent Nest, Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined. That's what Frank Zarinsky at Motion City Media tells me. He says Indeed did it again. Just wrapped up an interview with a gentleman named Adam that came to us through a paid Indeed ad. And this guy is awesome. Total wow. Perfect fit for Motion City Media. Kind, compassionate about film. We can't wait to begin working with him. Get started right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/standup. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Indeed.com/standup. The offer valid through September 30th. Terms and conditions do apply. All right. I'm very excited to share with you my conversation with Matt Jones. We sat down last week before Kentucky became a hotbed for COVID again, so I don't ask him about that. Matt is a super interesting guy that comes highly recommended from listener Matt Elliott. You can find him on Twitter at KY Sports Radio. He's the creator and host of Kentucky Sports Radio with 40 affiliates around the state. He's also the co-owner of OVW Wrestling and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Mitch, Please, which I just ordered and got. And Matt and I we argued really a lot about how to talk to poor white folks in rural areas in America. We had a really fun conversation at the top where we were just trading stories, making each other laugh about our similar career paths and the kind of things that happen in live radio. And I really like this guy. Yes, we argue a little bit, but I would talk to him for another 2 hours about several things. I'm going to talk to him again after I read his book. I think he makes a lot of good points. I think he's great at not letting me interrupt him. It's just an all-around great conversation I'm really happy to have had. And I hope if there are new listeners that are fans of Matt Jones, I hope you'll enjoy this podcast, which I put out daily. And I'm very excited to share it with you. My first conversation, hopefully not last, with Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio 8 at KY Sports Radio. Here we go. Oh, and I'll be posting the video of our conversation on my YouTube at youtube.com/standupwithpete ASAP.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, I've never seen that before where it tells you it's being recorded.
She is very in command, that woman. That's the CEO of Zoom.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's super controlling. Somebody came up with an idea, like there should be a voice that lets everybody know, and then she's like, "I'll do it."
Well, that's what you want out of a CEO. Is take charge attitude.
So listen, man, I'm psyched to talk to you because I think sometimes the coolest interviews for me are the ones where somebody listens to this show, especially in this case for a real long time, says, "Hey, you should you should meet this guy. You should talk to this guy. And so shout out to longtime listener Matt Elliott for doing just that. And I spent a whole bunch of time looking into your work. I'm really excited to read your book about Mitch McConnell. And so I'm a big fan. I'm really psyched to talk to you, Matt. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you. That's a better intro than Andrew Yang gave me. When I went on Andrew Yang's podcast, he said, normally we have people on here that my audience knows and has heard of. Yeah. That might not be true here, but it's still going to be great. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
The worst.
I ended up really enjoying that, too. So.
The worst intro I ever had, I'll never forget this. It was like an all-black comedians on Jamie Foxx's show and me. And none of them knew who I was, but it was like Sirius told them, you have to have him on because he's on another channel, cross promotion. They didn't want to have me on. They had no idea who I was. And the host goes, all right, our next guest is, and he looks at me and he goes, why don't you just introduce yourself? I was like, I'm what? Like, imagine that. Like the Tonight Show, like Jay Leno just says, our next guest, you know what? Just come on out, Matt Jones, and tell us about yourself.
I do that when I can't pronounce people's name. I know
well, that's fair.
I know now people, it's like, that's sort of considered rude if you can't pronounce people's name, but like I'm bad at it. So I host a show on ESPN radio on the weekends, and I'm notorious for not knowing how to pronounce people's names. So sometimes I'm just like, oh, let's just get this guest on and you tell us how to pronounce your name. And they always like that better than me botching it.
I've done some horrifically embarrassing things, and anybody who works in live radio, as I did for years, as you do and have for years, you can't have that back. What's kind of like one of the most embarrassing, like celebrity or just embarrassing things you've ever said or done near a microphone?
So there's a women's basketball coach, very famous when she coached the U.S. Olympic team, Kara Lawson. Mm-hmm. And Kara Lawson was coming on my show. She was calling a UK basketball game in Kentucky. And I brought her on. And, the two big rivals were Tennessee and Connecticut. And I think she went to Tennessee. Although I get them confused. I can't remember whether she went to Tennessee or Connecticut. I did this massive intro, though, where I was like, Kara Lawson, you had such a great career. Let's just say at Connecticut. And, Gino loved you. And it turns out she had gone to Tennessee. And she really didn't like it. And, it made it very difficult. It genuinely, I think, made her angry that I had gotten the wrong one. And I felt terrible about it. And the whole interview was just complete trash.
That is bad, but I hate to top you. Actress Laura Dern.
Yes.
I'm interviewing her. She's such a kind, cool, awesome woman. Everybody respects her. And during the interview, I asked her about a relationship with her dad, who's also a famous actress, named Bruce Dern. And I said to her, sadly, we lost your dad a couple years ago. And then she told me about a relationship with her dad. She answered my question, and then I get a text from my producer that says, Bruce is alive. I killed her father.
That's bad. Yeah, if you read in Mitch, Please, I tell the story about Amy McGrath. Yeah. You mind if I tell this?
Please, I was gonna get in the book. So yeah,
So Amy McGrath is this woman. A lot of people, your listeners may remember, she ran against Mitch McConnell and lost by about 1,000. But I was considering running in the Democratic primary against her. And it had been a tense relationship. I won't go into all of it. But all of a sudden, I was driving through this town, and I get a text message, and it says, I'd been doing my radio show, and it was a town with not good cell service in Kentucky. So, I hadn't had my cell phone on. And I turn it on, and I get this text message that says, condolences on the passing of your father. Fathers are wonderful people. Talking about my stepdad. Well, I was fairly certain that my stepdad had not died, but my phone had been off for a few hours. So my heart sort of skipped a beat, right? And I called my mom and I'm like, is everything okay? And she's like, yes. And I told her, and I said, well, she said, if anything ever happens to Larry, you will not hear about it from Amy McGrath. But so then the question is how do you respond to that? She said condolences on the passing of your father. My buddy was with me and said, you should respond condolences on the passing of your campaign. But I didn't do that. I just had to say well, my dad actually hasn't died, but I understand. And you want to know what she responded? I don't know what you're supposed to say, but all she responded was, sorry about that. And that was it. I would have felt so much worse. Like, I would have called and been like, listen, I didn't mean it, blah, blah, blah. She just said, like, sorry. Like, as if she had, like, spilled something on me.
I'd have deleted the text and your name from my phone and hope I never saw you or heard from you again, because there's no way. But again, I'm going to have to top you, because, again, and this one's about me just being stupid. Again, my best friend's dad died a few years ago. So I reached out to his older brother, same situation. Hey, so sorry about your dad. Now, he'd been sick for a while. He didn't know his dad died. He was he was in the air on an airplane traveling back. I told him that his dad died. He had to find out from me. And I just assumed.
But I can imagine, I mean, who else would you want to find out about it except from a comedian radio host? That's who I'd want to find out.
We did, yeah. So anyway, folks, I'm doing a new thing on Cameo. Sorry, Matt, let me just do this. Where I will call people who don't know it and tell them that somebody has died. It's $15. So, all right, back to the Matt Jones interview. So, dude,
by the way, that's a fun game to play. I do it on my show all the time. How much are people going for on Cameo? Because the self-worth that people believe they have is fascinating to me. Because I read a story about how Kevin from The Office, and I don't know that guy's real name.
Yeah.
But he makes more money on Cameo than anyone. And they in the story, they basically said it's because he's recognized that he can be the cheap guy on Cameo. So he can be like, he's like $75. And like he gets hundreds of them because it's cheap. And he said, look, this has become a huge income for me. But then you see like Sebastian Bach going for $450. And you're like, dude, like you really have a high view of yourself if you think people are going to pay that. But
are you on it?
Oh, yeah, of course.
How much do you charge?
I was $40 for a long time. I just went to $50. I kind of felt like it was a D-bag move to go to $50, but I did. But you know, I feel like it's hard to do. It's hard to talk about Cameo without making you sound like a complete.
Oh, you know, you can't. The whole thing gives you the douche chills, I think. And it's like, I mean, listen, you're an entrepreneur, so I expect it. You're gonna do a whole bunch of things. You're gonna have a whole bunch of revenue streams. I'm on Cameo for $20. I've had a few,
really?
I've had a few requests, but I go around them. I feel so uncomfortable with it. I don't even remember signing up for it. That when people request me, I Google their name, I find them, I go, motherfucker, just call me for free. I'm here. I'll talk to you. I got nothing. Like if you would pay, or subscribe to my, like people who pay to subscribe to me on Patreon have also tried to hire me. I'm like, no, just call me, dude.
Yeah, well, my buddies and I used to just send each other cheap cameos all the time. And the best one was the guy that played Parker Lewis. I think his name is
I love that show.
Nimmick.
Yeah.
Nimmick.
Yeah.
He was like $30. So I sent it to a friend of mine and I said, my buddy wants to be a comedian. Would you talk him into it? And Corin Nimmick, these videos, they're normally like 30 or 40 seconds. They're like, hey, thanks for being a fan, blah, blah, blah. Corin Nimmick talked to my buddy for 11 minutes about being a comedian. And again, not in a conversation, just an 11-minute monologue. And of course, my buddy doesn't want to be a comedian, but he just talked for 11 straight minutes. And I tipped him, which you can do that. Because I was like, man, you don't talk that long. I'll give you $10 more.
Listen, let me just put it out there again, folks listening to my podcast. If you want to talk, I'll just send me your number. I'll call you. I'm not that. But like the question to you is now you're in demand. You're really, well-known guy, especially in Kentucky. Everybody knows you in Kentucky sports. Everybody knows you in Kentucky politics. Everybody knows you. You're a very well-known guy. You're going for whatever it is, $40 on Cameo. So the question to you is, who would you pay for? Putting all douchebaggery aside, who would you pay, dead or alive, to, in this case, Cameo's just get a recording. You're not having dinner with them. You're just getting a recording from that person.
That's a great question. I would say my sort of idol, or not idol, but sort of my hero in the biz, David Letterman. And so I think I would do it for Dave. I went to a Reds game. I'm a Reds fan. And I went one day and David Letterman happened to be there. He grew up a Reds fan, apparently. And on his way out, I did that thing where I was like, can I have a selfie? And there's a picture of me with a selfie with him where he's faking a smile, and it's my Facebook profile picture. That's how much I like David Letterman. So I think I would pay to have David Letterman just tell me that he likes me and that we are friends, even though we aren't.
One more question along these lines, because we could probably do this forever, just trading these stories. But have you had a really awkward or embarrassing encounter with a well-known person that you want to share?
I've got one of my greatest stories is I once was on a Southwest Airlines flight with my buddy, and Marilyn Manson sat middle seat between the two of us. It's a true story. I'll make it quick because it's a very long story, but we see him in the airport and we walk up to him. He's in like this gift shop. And we say, can we get a picture? And we're very nervous because it's Marilyn Manson, right? Because he's creepy. And he holds up one of these things. It's like a back massager, but it looks like a vibrator. And he goes, if you'll hold this up in the picture, I will. So we have this picture of me and Drew and Marilyn Manson holding it up. And it's weird. But we're like, oh, that's funny. So then we get on the airplane and we're like two of the first people on. We sit down and we leave the middle seat open with the theory no one will sit in the middle seat between two 6'4" guys. Marilyn Manson comes on and picks the middle seat between us. And he sits there for like an hour and a half. And he is out of his mind. But he never shut up. For an hour and a half, he talked nonstop, telling us about ideas he had for TV shows and movies. And they're all like psychotic, like they're crazy. And at first you're like, this is really cool. But then after like 45 minutes, you're like, will Marilyn Manson ever shut up? Like he'll never stop talking. He goes, let's get a round of drinks. He orders this round of drinks. They come and bring it. And then he looks at me and goes, you got this, don't you? And I end up paying for it because he ordered it and I ended up paying for it. It was an hour and a half of insanity. We told that story on a podcast once with the Sklar brothers. Yeah. And it won like some sort of comedy award because it was when it was fresh on our minds.
Oh, well, then people should go find that because I know that you've told that in my prep. I read about that because it's apparently such an epic story, and so people should go look up the longer version of it.
But I also got his Snapchat, and sometimes at night when I'm with my friends, we'll Snapchat him, and sometimes he responds. Like we haven't done it since he's had his legal troubles, but he oddly would sometimes respond on Snapchat, Marilyn Manson.
I have the exact same story about Harvey Weinstein, and he's still responding to my snaps. We're very close. We're super close. I think he's been wronged. I want to talk with you about, like, there's so many things that I want to ask you about, but I feel like there's got to be very few people who understand the state of Kentucky better than you because of what you do for a living and what you've done with your life and career. And so from politics to sports and traveling to every county to write your book, everybody knows you and you know a lot of people. But I think the thing that's most probably unique about you, you tell me what you think, is that you're a pretty, it would seem, progressive-minded guy, but a huge percentage of your audience is conservative. Granted, you don't exclusively talk about politics, but at this point in time, we hate each other no matter what. So even if I agree with your sports, if I find out that you're a liberal in this case, I'm not listening to your show. I'm not supporting anything that you do. Help me, how accurate is that a huge portion of your audience disagrees with your politics and what, then I want to ask you about what's up with them. What do they think?
Yeah, I would say 80% of my audience is conservative, and I don't think it's close. I mean, the conservatives in this state know me a lot better than the liberals. That was going to be a problem if I ran, is that a lot of the liberals for the primary wouldn't have known me at all. People ask me, I think there's probably no radio show host in America that says what they think about politics no liberal that has more conservative listeners than I do. And I think the reason it is because for a lot of Americans, now I'm not talking about the people who are obsessed about politics, the people who talk about it all the time, but for the average American, especially in the South and especially in places like Kentucky, politics is less about issues as it is culture.
Identity.
Politics is more about sort of what you think of me as a person, the things I like to do, etc. And so I think the biggest problem that liberals and progressives have in places like Kentucky is not our position on issues. Honestly, Kentucky's a blue collar state. On a lot of issues, they agree with us. It is mostly a cultural thing. You think you're better than me, right? Like you all think we're stupid. You all think we're idiots. You think we're backwards, and they feel it from our side. And I think the reason they listen to me is that they don't feel it from me because, as Jeff Foxworthy says, I is one of them, right? Like I like the same things they do. I like country music. I like wrestling. I own a professional wrestling organization, for goodness sakes. I like, NASCAR. And so I think they can listen to me disagree with them on issues because they know on their day-to-day lives, I'm the same as they are. And that's why it works. And there just aren't many people like that. I mean, think about it. How many Southern or mountain, I'm from the mountains more than I'm from the South. How many mountain folks do you hear that are progressive? They don't put us on TV. Like if you turn on MSNBC, there ain't nobody that sounds like me. And so they don't think people like me exist. And I'm kind of proof every day that, you know what, there are people in your community that think like this.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I have a billion questions as a result. But how much on your day-to-day radio show, I'm still confused because you do so many things and I haven't, but you do a daily radio show. And how much of it, 2 hours a day?
Yeah, it's called Kentucky Sports Radio, but it's only partially sports. So I talk mostly sports, but a lot of it's goofiness. A lot of it's just me and my friends being silly. And yes, I sometimes bring up politics. So, I mean, I led the show off yesterday talking about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, most sports radio shows aren't going to do that, but my audience expects me to because they know that's now here's what I don't do. I don't preach to them. Like, I don't sit there and say, you need to think this. That wouldn't work. I say, this is what I think. This is why I think it. And then I try to give some, I don't want to say credibility, but I try to note the other side so they don't just think I'm sitting there going, hey, everybody else are idiots.
Yeah.
And I think that is why people will listen. And, some people don't like it, but the vast majority of people will come up to me. I always say I'm like their one liberal friend. A lot of people listen to this probably have one conservative friend. I am the state of Kentucky's one liberal friend, and that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to get away with or to build an audience, much less maintain an audience, and do both politics and sports, even if you do mostly one or the other. If sports came up on my old show, or even now, I'm like, no, not because, I don't know, I can't talk about it, that's why. I like to listen to other people talk about it sometimes. I'm interested in sports, but that's not what I do. And so people would be turned off by it and vice versa. But you're able to do that. So that's a credit to you and your show and your reputation. But let me just then drill down on that. I'm sure there's some like scholarly study or probably book written about this, but what's your take on the overlap of sports fans and political ideology? I suppose it's like a lot of things, it's regional. But then when I think about football fans or NASCAR fans, as you mentioned earlier, or I think specifically MMA, I think of a certain type of person. You name a sport, and I'm going to think of a certain type of person.
Okay, but they've done studies on this. I mean, there are studies that I've read some of them that show the sport to the political ideology. So, it shouldn't surprise you. The most conservative sport in terms of. You want to ask me?
Quiz me.
What do you think it is? What do you think is the sport that has the most conservative fans?
Is this a trick question or something, or no? Is it obvious? I'd say auto racing.
I was second. NASCAR second, but first you said it is MMA. So MMA is first.
Okay.
NASCAR is second. College football is third. Okay. Now, but then there are sports that have liberal fan bases. The most liberal fan bases is the NBA.
But that's because a huge percentage of NBA fans are people of color.
Minorities. Right? Yes, exactly right. And so, but again. What I think is the way you reach them is I think the thing that we progressives are really, really, really bad at, okay? We're good at some things. We're bad at this. We don't understand average Americans. And by average, I don't just mean white average Americans. I also mean black average Americans. We just don't understand them because we preach at them. We don't listen to them. And that is the problem. So a lot of the times We just don't know what the average person is even thinking about. Forget their side. We don't know what the issues are that even matter to them. Now, we know the issues we think should matter to them, but that might not be what matters. And so one of the things I try to do, I deal only with the state of Kentucky. I try not to worry about the other 49 states. They're not my audience. My show every day, I'm sitting there trying to say, if I'm the average Kentuckian, what do I care about today?
Sure.
And that's what I talk about, whatever that is. When you turn on a lot of stuff I want you to someday forget about what they're saying and just turn on a Fox News, Tucker, Hannity type show, and then turn on some of our liberal shows. The Tucker and Hannity people are talking about things we think are stupid, but those are the things that affect people's daily lives. Whereas a lot of the stuff we talk about is bigger picture, but it doesn't. Here's how I saw it one day. I turned on Tucker Carlson about a week ago, and he was talking about mask. I turned on MSNBC, I think it was Rachel Maddow, and she was talking about the infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
Now, for the average American that doesn't care about politics, the mask affects their daily life. The infrastructure bill, they don't think does, and that's why they sometimes gravitate the other way.
I think there's a lot of truth to everything that you just said. My two quibbles with it is, talk about the average person. Liberals are the average person, and I understand exactly what they think because, like you, I'm one of them. I grew up in upstate New York on a farm.
When you say liberals, I think you need to be careful what liberals you're talking about. Okay. Let's take the African American community. One of the things that's not talked about is why the rates of vaccination are so low in the African-American community. That we always think of it as Trump voters, and that's part of it, but that's not all of it. And I've tried to understand it myself. I'm not going to claim to understand, but there is no conversation on TV about why are African-Americans not taking the vaccine.
You're wrong about that, and here's a great point. Why? You're making a point about what you've seen. And I think that's a major mistake. That's what you've seen. I've seen tons of coverage, deep dives into So I think
what is the result? Why do they believe it? Why are they not taking it that you've seen? I'm not saying you're wrong. I just want to know why.
Because they have every reason not to trust government. Specifically, they all know about the Tuskegee experiment.
And you know what? I agree with that. You know who else has a right to not trust government? Poor white people. Because if you're from Appalachia, like I am, government has screwed you over.
I hear you. I hear you on that. Poor white people, but they weren't not getting vaccinated.
Listen to what you just did, because I'm not trying to get on you.
No,
but this is very important. For some reason that I do not understand, progressives feel the need to downplay the things poor white people feel. Why? The problem is. Let me finish. Now let's say whatever you want. Corporate America and the wealthy want us to fight amongst poor people as to who has it worse. I'm not saying poor white people have it worse than poor black people. I'm saying, why are we even having that conversation? Like, why is there such a need for people, liberals, to say, hey, poor white people, you don't have it as bad as you think it is? Yes, they do. Okay. It's different. It's different. There are experiences minorities have that poor white people will never understand. But if you're I would challenge a progressive to come where I grew up in East Kentucky and drive around and tell me what these folks have gotten that's been so great. They've been screwed over for 100 years, from the start of coal mines down through it. And yet, when they raise valid concerns, the first thing they hear from folks like Pete, and I'm not, the first thing they hear is, but blah, 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 blah.
I 100% agree with you, except for one point. The point I was going to make is, but poor white people did get vaccinated before. This is not an issue of their poverty or their culture. This is an issue of a purposeful misinformation campaign from the people that they listen to in media and from their politicians.
I have to say this with all due respect. That too is a patronizing comment.
Go ahead.
Okay, maybe it is because they don't trust media because media has screwed them over. We think of everything in this Trump, Biden parallel, like polarization world. You got to go back in history to how people in the rural areas have been shown in the media for 75 years. Every time the media talks about us, they talk about us like we're hilljacks that don't understand anything, that can be made fun of at will. And then they come back and say, well, why don't you listen to us when we tell you what to do? Because we don't trust you. And that is not because of Trump. I mean, look, has Trump and the Tucker Carlsons of the world made it worse? Of course they have. Is Tucker Carlson despicable? Of course he is. But we have a role in this. We still believe the one group of people you can mock with no regrets are poor white people. You can mock the hell out of them and nobody will say a word to you. And that to me is why, and then you wonder why they don't want to listen to you because you mock them.
Yeah, I have spent most of my career, covering all different aspects of poverty in all cultures, including tribal, but especially in white. I tried to do a project called Poorest Zip Codes, where I would go to every zip code in the country where poor people lived, and especially white ones, like the one my mom grew up in, very poor. But I absolutely 100% disagree with what you said, that poor white people aren't any better off than poor black people.
That's not what I said. I didn't say that. What I said was
you said they don't have it as bad.
What I said is that conversation is not helpful, and that's the conversation liberals want to have. I do not understand the desire to compare whether poor black people or poor white people have it worse. This is not a competition.
Because of policies.
Let me finish. We need to help both.
Sure.
Okay. But the first thing liberals want to do, you're doing it right now, is say, hey, poor white people, you don't have it as bad. Why? What? Because once you do that, Pete, then they don't care what else you say. Because the moment you start with that, you have downplayed their concerns. It's the same way when Republicans talk to black people and they say things that are always patronizing and rude. And then they wonder why black people don't vote Republican. Well, no shit. You treat them like they're idiots. Well, guess what? Liberals do the same thing to rural white people. They say, you have yet to say a word, and I'm not trying to get on you.
No, go ahead.
You're representative of a thing. You've yet to say a word that says these people do have a reason to feel this way. All you keep saying is it ain't as bad as it is for black people. You mentioned the 10 poorest zip codes.
Yeah.
5 of the 7 poorest counties in America are a 2-hour drive from where I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. Literally, the New York Times did a story about quality of life and found 7 of the 10 worst places to live in America by their thing are in Eastern Kentucky. And most liberals' first reaction to that is, yeah, but. That's what they do. Yeah, but.
I don't.
Explain why it's worse for other people.
So let me try this one on you. And first of all, let me just say, I love every single moment of this conversation, but none more than the times you've refused to allow me to interrupt you because you're making a great point. And I'm jumping in there because of my impulsive assholery. So great work there. I appreciate it and expect
That's
nothing.
That's just me being a radio host. I'm sorry.
No, I expect nothing less from you, given your entire career. But the point I want to try to make is I 100% understand the struggle of poor white people. And I could talk all about the specific elements of the struggle of white people. I hate when people minimize white people's struggle. I think it does exactly what you're saying. White people have all kinds of personal and community-based tragedies and struggles with financial and health and so on. I don't agree, though, to some extent, with what you... Here's the problem, and I really want to know what you think of it. So if you're really poor, whether you're black, white, Hispanic, or Native American, you're all going to benefit from a lot of similar policies.
I agree. Totally. Totally. I mean,
why do poor white people hate?
Because they don't like, you want to know the answer? Because they don't like you. It's not because, here's a funny thing I realized.
I know, and that's...
But let me explain why they don't like you. Let me be clear.
Yeah. Is it my stand-up act?
Not you personally, obviously, but
I'm a bald man.
I came to a realization one day. I was sitting in Clay County with a bunch of people I know there. Clay County is one of those counties, by the way, that's one of the poorest in America. It is as country as it gets. And I was sitting with 5 Republicans who make fun of me for liking Democrats. And I was sitting there talking to them, and I explored a thesis with them. You know who people think that rural Americans don't like African Americans or Hispanics. You know who they hate the most? White liberals, especially white intelligent liberals, because of the way they talk to them. Like, they understand, a lot of Trump voters understand why African Americans are upset. They don't understand why you, and I don't mean you personally, but people like you talk down to them the way you do. And they actually, it's funny, Eastern Kentucky, where it's so poor, there's a lot of black people there. There's a lot of black people that get along very well with the community. The people they don't like the most are rich white liberals. That's who they really don't like. And the reason is because of how they talk to them. So to answer your question, I totally agree with you. The policies that help African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, all would help poor white people. The problem is not the policy, it's the messenger. And if you don't believe me, go watch Bernie Sanders talk to these people. Bernie Sanders, I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but I will give Bernie credit. Bernie will go to West Virginia. Bernie will go to Eastern Kentucky, and he'll talk to them in a way that makes them respect him. AOC, to her credit, we had a little thing where she and a congressman, it's a long story, but she wants to come to Eastern Kentucky and talk to people. That's to her credit.
Sure.
Most people, though, in the liberal world just want to make fun of them or talk down to them or tell them how stupid they are. And their answer is always, why don't you do what I say? It's what's best for you. And the reason is they don't like you because of how you talk to them.
I know, but I don't disagree with you. And I actually think I do a pretty good job when I do talk to them. And I want them to talk to me.
This isn't about you. I just want to be clear. I'm just using you as a general.
No, it could be
about you personally.
No, but it could be. And I specifically want to know the things people say and the way they handle them. But so getting past a little bit of that, although I could discuss it a lot. What do you think works then for them specifically to get the message on vaccines? Let's forget about
Let's talk about vaccines. I went on a tour. I took my radio show. See, a lot of people talk about this. I often do it. I went on a radio show to the 5 counties in Kentucky with the lowest vaccine rates. And I did a show from the county to encourage people to get vaccinated, to get the vaccine. And how did I do it? Well, I sat down and when I talked about it, I said, here are the things I hear are your concerns. Rather than mocking those concerns, let's talk about it. So one concern I always hear is, we don't know, could the vaccine have long-term effects? That's one of the things people say because it's rushed through and all that stuff. Now, oftentimes people just laugh at that concern. Here's what I say. You know what? I can see why you'd say that. You know what else might have long-term effects, though? The virus. Like, if you're worried about long-term effects about the vaccine, what about long-term effects about the virus? Yeah. And every time I say that, people go, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that, And that's because it was literally a simple act. It was acknowledging that the thing they were worried about wasn't crazy.
Right.
It was rational, but here's how you counter it. What we do too much, and I say we because I'm not going to act like I don't do it sometimes. What we do too much is, rather than listen, hear, and try to work through, we mock, scorn, and yell, and then wonder why the people won't listen to us. And the thing that's weird is we would never do it with African Americans. We would never do it with Hispanics. We understand that there are things we don't understand, and we often we try to show humility.
We have men with women.
Why don't we do it with rural white people?
I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but Anthony Fauci hasn't talked down to any rural white people.
Anthony Fauci, though, isn't the perfect messenger. Although
name anybody you want, because my thing is, I think you're wrong to a small extent here, and just on the vaccination thing, because rural doctors are going to be the most effective messenger because they have personal relationships with the people in their community and the patients, and they can't convince. Hold on. Let me just finish because I really want to get your responses. The problem isn't, and maybe you're not even saying this, that we're the reason they're not getting vaccinated isn't because they don't trust liberals. It's because, in my opinion, Matt, they have been misinformed by slick, amazingly produced propaganda videos that are more convincing. That's what's got them convinced. Dis and misinformation is why they're not getting vaccinated, not because we don't know how to.
Again, I just want you to know, first of all, do I think misinformation has played a role in it? Yes.
And forget, and by the way, just real quick, forget poor people. I'm talking about my rich, educated cousin.
But you refuse to, like, what you've said is it's completely rational for black people to be scared of it. It is completely misinformation and irrational for white people.
I didn't say that.
But that's the implication. And what I would say to you is a lot of the reasons. Did you ever see that skit Saturday Night Live did during the election? I thought it was, by the way, one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen on Saturday Night Live. It was Black Jeopardy, and Tom Hanks played.
Yes.
But you know why that was brilliant?
Yeah.
Because he was noting that a lot of the things that made black people not trust the government, the Trump supporters feel the same way. And the answers to the questions that the Trump guy would make were exactly the same as the black people on the thing. And I thought that was brilliant because at its core, many of the reasons, now I'm not saying all the reasons, and I'm not giving a universal, like, rural white people don't do anything wrong, because they do.
No, I don't think you're
right. But I am saying to you, a lot of the things that make rural white people feel disengaged are the same reasons black people do. Now, black people have reasons that white people don't, but there is some commonality there. But again, our first inclination is to kind of poo-poo it. I know most of your listeners are sitting there going, oh, come on. I mean, like, they don't have it as bad. But the problem is, here's what we would never do, and then I'll shut up about this. We would never look at a black person or a Hispanic person and say, you don't have it as bad as the Hispanics do. Or we would never say to an Hispanic person, you don't have it as bad as the black people do. But man, we have no problem doing that to poor white people. And I'm saying to you, poor white people's concerns are important too. Now, they're different, but rather than us always thinking about who's got it worse, why don't we try to improve it for everyone?
Well, that's what Democrats by
but they
policy.
Don't do it. They don't do it, Pete. They sit there and they go, they sit there and do what your first reaction was. But it's not.
No. Hold on a second. Do you disagree that Democrats advocate for policies that would benefit the people in Kentucky you're talking about?
Yes. On a policy standpoint.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
On a policy standpoint, Democrats are better than Republicans for poor people 97% of the time.
Right.
It's the messenger and how we talk to people.
I think
so your first question, how do you get these people to listen to you? Do you want to know the answer for real? Because they trust me and they don't trust you all. And the reason is exactly what I said. They know I care about them. They think you all look down on them. That's the reason, period.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's 100% right. And I think everybody can do a better job communicating. But let me go back to another point you made, which I think I would quibble with, which is that the conservative media people talk about what the rural poor or rural white folks care about. Sometimes they do. But Matt, you know this as well as anybody does. In the morning, you come up with your content. What are you going to talk about? You come up with things that you think are going to work. No, you cannot tell me, maybe you can, that some rural white guy could give a flying fuck or even knew or has ever had an experience that a trans person was doing anything. They don't know any trans people. Even if they did, they wouldn't know it. The bathroom issue or the trans issue is not an issue in their lives until Ben Shapiro and Sean Hannity make it.
Listen, on the point of...
But that's one example. They manufacture conflicts that aren't happening.
I don't disagree. But now, wait a minute, though. My point is a derivative of that. Okay. I do not disagree with you that they manufacture outrage. No doubt. Dr. Seuss, the bathroom bills, they manufacture outrage. But here's the reason it works. Okay, I think rather than just because they're never going to, we can't end this by just acting like these people are all of a sudden going to stop. They're going to keep doing it. But we need to understand why it works. And here's why it works. At the core of the bathroom bill conversation is even though it's nonsense, and even though I would argue poor white people would embrace, let's use gay marriage as an example. Remember how outraged everybody was 10 years ago? Yeah, now it's never even brought up.
Right.
Because places like where I grew up are now cool with it. They were now they know gay people because now gay people are out more. And guess what? They're like, why was I so upset? The same will be true about trans people at some point. It will. It may take a while. It will take a while, but it will.
Yeah.
But the reason those issues work is at their core. They're talking about things that these people deal with in their daily life. So the bathroom bill, all that stuff was nonsense. But the idea of, I want my child to be safe in the bathroom, just that idea is something that everyone agrees with. Okay. We spend a lot of our time talking about abstract ideas that are very important, but that they can't relate to. To put it a different way, their political people are entertainers, and our political people are policy people. And entertainers are going to win out over policy people every day of the week. You're in radio. If you can look past what they do, Rush Limbaugh and those dudes are awful people, but they were better entertainers.
Sure. The
only liberal radio host to ever have success. Al Franken.
Yeah, the most successful liberals in media are
entertainers.
Are comedians. Jon Stewart, John Oliver, Stephen Colbert.
And I'm saying to you, the Tuckers of the world, they're not as good as the Jon Stewarts, but they're better entertainers than our news people. And that's why they win.
They
know. Here's what they know. They know that before you can get a message across, you have to know how to engage people.
I think it's way simpler than that. I'd love to know what you think. The difference isn't that they're better entertainers. They might be, but the difference is on the right, they have no problem ginning up artificial fear, which will always motivate anybody. And on the left, they don't want to do that. I find it immoral to say something I don't believe, much less say something.
People, but listen, yes. Do they generate artificial fear? Yes, they do. And does it work with old people? Because old people get scared?
It works with everybody. Yeah. It works with young people. It doesn't work with
everybody because most young people here's the reason why Jon Stewart was even more successful than Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. Because he was an even better entertainer than they are.
He wasn't more successful.
No, he was. He's got more cultural impact. Tucker Carlson gets 3 million people to view, but it's the same 3 million people every night. How many people know who Jon Stewart is?
Well, if you're measuring just on that, but sure, fine. But in terms of getting people actually elected and judges appointed and policies passed.
See, you say that, but when everybody votes, we win because we have more cultural impact than them. I mean, remember, LeBron James or Taylor Swift is a lot more important than any conservative spokesperson. Our we kill them on the celebrities. I mean, we have 95% of the celebrities on our side.
Yeah.
But here's the reason those people's message can often be effective. If you're an entertainer, you have to be used to talking to people to have gotten famous. Our politicians, so many of our politicians, and this is, by the way, the Republicans, if I were giving this speech to Republicans, they have a problem on the other side, which is now they're just electing people to go after the crazies, right? The Marjorie Taylor Greens. But our problem is most of our politicians come from majority liberal districts. They don't ever have to talk to conservatives. So no wonder they're not able to do it. Joe Manchin, let me use Joe Manchin's example. Most of your listeners probably hate Joe Manchin. I have so much respect for Joe Manchin, and here's why. He's the only dude that's getting elected with a D next to his name in West Virginia. The only one. Get him out of office, and you're going to lose by 20 points in the next election. The reason he can do it is because he can talk about issues in a way that they don't hate him. Barack Obama did better where I grew up than Joe Biden. Why? People would say a black guy did better than Joe Biden because Obama actually was pretty good at talking to those people because he grew up in Hawaii, Kansas, had to spend time in Illinois. He was better at it, honestly, than a lot of our other Democratic politicians are.
Is Biden not been?
Biden's, I think, good. The problem with Biden is you got this Trump machine. Trump, now let me say, everything I've said becomes different with Trump. Why? Because Trump was a hell of an entertainer at its core.
Yeah, but he was also like, I want you to just take on, I think you glossed over, and I think it's the most important point, at least that I made about that. It's the fear. Trump opened his, on day one. Rapists are coming to rape your kids. That works.
Why is it when these other people do it, they're not as successful?
What?
The other politicians that are Trump clones have actually had a hard time winning, except in major Republican
districts.
He's
better at it, but Hannity and Tucker are doing the same thing.
You know why? Because Tucker's a good entertainer. I can't stand him, but he's good at it.
It's fear.
It's not just fear.
It's constant fear. That's why they have so many people. You watch those shows.
I do want to note this. I think you're getting off track here, but I do want to note this. Your excuse for why we can't connect with these people is always an excuse that absolves you of responsibility. It is always an excuse of, well, they don't understand. They don't vote in their best interest. They're susceptible to fear. I never hear people go, you know what? Maybe I should try to approach this differently. It's always about, and again, we wouldn't do that with Black and Hispanic people. If Black people didn't go out to vote, we wouldn't go, well, it's because they don't understand. We would sit there and say, what can we do to try to understand and to change behavior? And that's what we should do. Why don't we do it with poor white people? We just say it's their fault. And that's why, to start the first question of this podcast, that's why, Pete, they don't like us.
Well, they like you.
And they like me because I'll go on forums like this and say this shit.
Right? Yeah.
Most people will, and let me just say, most people won't. Most progressives are not going to go on a progressive show and take up for Trump voters. Who's doing that? I will. And they know that. And that's why they'll listen to me.
One more question along these lines. Why do the most frightening statistic I've read, and maybe you'll disagree with it, at least on anecdotes, not necessarily with data, I think the data is pretty sound in polling, is that a huge percentage of white people, frighteningly large, I think it was like 51% or something, think that they have it harder than minorities in America. That to me is like, what are we missing there?
Yeah, I think.
Or even I hear this a lot too, Matt.
To answer that question, I would need to see how things are worded. But I think part of it is also the mere question of who has it harder leads to, you got to pick one, right? Leads to a polarization that brings out the worst in everybody. Remember, I am not arguing that white people have it harder. I'm arguing that question is nonsense. It's not worth doing. We should help everybody. So my assumption is, and I don't know because I've never had a conversation with somebody where they went, I have it harder than Black people. I've never heard anyone say that. But my assumption is they probably think, well, I got to pick one, so I'm going to pick my side or something. But I don't know, because that's not a conversation, to be honest with you, Pete, I've ever had with somebody. I've heard racist. I'm not going to act like I haven't been around racist people. There are racist people. But I have never heard somebody say, I have it harder than Black people. So if there are 51% of white people saying that, they don't say it around me. So I don't know why they say.
That's a great answer. I appreciate it. But I do think that, and I think you're right to say, got to see how that's asked and why it's even asked and what it creates. And I agree with you. It's just, I think it's, you're trying to understand what people's attitudes are on things is a way to meet them wherever they are and support policies that they think will.
Here's the thing. You want to win over. Look, here's the other thing. We've got to win some of these people over, at least in the short term, to win elections. Right now, in the long term, the demographics of this country are going to change, and it may not matter as much. But in the short term, we got to win some of these folks over.
Agreed.
And how do you win them over? I would just ask everyone to sit back and think, how do you get won over? Like, think about the times in your life you've changed your mind about something, and how did it happen? Here's what I'm going to guess. If you were to sit back and think about it, it was never because somebody screamed at you. It was never because somebody told you were stupid. It was never because somebody told you that you were naive. It was because somebody probably met you on your turf and were able to talk to you. Why don't we want to do the same thing?
I think it's a fair question. But, the one part, and maybe I'm missing it, why I'm not buying some of what you're selling is Donald Trump is the worst kind of elitist.
He's the worst.
Looking down on. And the reason they supported him, and there is data for this, I just read about this, is overwhelmingly because he's a racist. He hates black people, Muslim people.
The mere fact that you would use that sentence, the reason they did it is this. See, it's funny. I thought you were going to ask me with that lead up, why did they support Trump? And here's what my answer was going to be, and I'll contrast it with what your answer was. My answer was Donald Trump is the one thing that's hard for me to figure out. And here's why. A lot of the things he stands for are against everything they believe. They distrust rich people. They distrust people from New York. They distrust people that lie. They distrust all these things. And yet they distrust Hollywood. And yet somehow he won them over. And I sit and listen, I deal with Trump voters. I bet you I deal with Trump voters more than anyone that listens to this thing. And I got to be honest with you, I don't really know why they fell.
I know why. I'm telling you why.
But see, the fact that,
but it's borne out in a tremendous.
I say this with love. Let me just, and then you can tell me why. I say this with love, but the fact that you would respond to that with "I know why" shows why they will never listen to you. There's no humility. There's no maybe it's complex. It's "I know why," and then that's it. And that's why they'll never listen to you. Because you think you know everything about them, and you don't.
But they tell you this.
Don't tell you. No white person is telling them I like Trump because he's racist. That's not what they say.
They say it without quite being
exactly.
So. Yeah, but there's research on this that says the likelihood of conservative Republicans did or did not support other conservative Republicans, Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney, and so on.
Let me ask you this then. If it's because they're racist, how would you explain the fact that black people vote for Trump more than they do other Republicans?
Because black people also hate Hispanic people and Muslim people.
You think black people vote for a person that you're saying is racist against black people because he's also racist against other people?
Let me just be clear. This is not what I think. This is the work of Liliana Mason. She's written a great book. She's done academic research on it. There's a ton of stuff here. Let me move on, though.
Here's what I would say. Maybe Liliana Mason knows more about the people I spend every day with than I do. Maybe she does. I'm not trying to downplay her. I would love to read. I would love to. If you, when this is over, will send me. I would love to read her work. But I will say this. The rationale for anyone engaging in any behavior is pretty complex. The reason we all do things is not, well, it's because of this. There's usually multiple things at play. And I refuse to believe that the reason they love Trump is he's racist, because there's a lot of people that are more abjectly racist than him that do worse. So there's a lot at play with Trump. I think I've spent 5 years trying to figure it out because let me be honest with you. This pisses me off that they like him, Pete. These are my people. I love them. The people in rural Kentucky are some of the best human beings on earth. They've been screwed. I'll start crying if I'm not careful. They've been screwed for generations. And the fact they've fallen for this con man drives me crazy. But even with that, I couldn't just sit here and tell you, well, they voted for him because of this. I think it's really hard. And maybe other people can. But when people who aren't them, like you or anyone else, tell them why they're doing what they're doing, they ain't going to listen to you anymore.
Listen, this constant refrain from especially people on the right, but like that, it's not political, really, of I don't like when people tell me what to do. I fucking hate that. I hate that. Like, I want to be like, someone's got to tell you what to do. Thank God my wife tells me what to do. Like, I have so many people in my life that tell me what to do. I ask people constantly, what should I do? Because they know and I don't.
I'm saying to you, I'm not saying that point's unreasonable.
Yeah.
But if you say that sentence, I don't want to hear you say you don't tell me what to do. You need to be told what to do, just so you know. They're never going to listen to anything you say.
Yeah.
So again, the start of all this, remember, the very first question was, why do these people listen to you? And the reason they listen to me and not you is because I don't have that attitude.
I understand that, but I still disagree with you. I mean, there's the last not about no. I mean, I think you're first of all, I actually think you're very right, but I think in terms of how you communicate and why they trust you, I think that all makes a tremendous amount of sense. But I think two things, you can hold two thoughts at once. And if you look at, for example, like I don't know if you saw the study, if you care about something like this, but like the vast majority of people who showed up on January 6th and who rushed the Capitol had something in common, which was that their communities had recently had more diversity moving in. They think listen, make America great again. What is that? What do you think?
I don't buy that. Listen, do I think that there were people in that crowd that were racist? Of course there were. Do I think everybody in that crowd was racist? No. But do I think, is it the majority or not? I haven't done a study. So I don't want
but it's the idea that in my local community, it's like, I don't want you to take down the elementary school.
Here's a little secret. Poor white people are around black people more than rich white people are. All right. Here's a little secret. You go to most, okay? I mean, you go to most rich school districts and go look at their student makeup, and then go to the South and see the student makeup. In just about every Southern public school, there is a better racial diversity than just about every school that rich white people go to. That's just a fact. I mean, Mississippi has the greatest percentage of black people in the country. All right. And they live in the same town as white people and go to the same schools as them. So this idea that they're not used to having to deal with black people. What are you talking about?
But we're not talking about poor people. We're talking about well off.
Okay, but yes. Now, do I think there are Karens out there that don't want to deal with it? Yes. And I hate saying that because my mom's named Karen.
Oh, that's rough. Let me ask you about that.
But I'm going, again, I'm talking about poor white people. Don't use me to take up for rich white people. Get somebody else. I'm talking about poor white people. Rich white people, they don't need my help.
Listen, I appreciate you and what you're saying.
Poor white people have no one that takes up for them economically. Now, they got a lot of idiots that take up for them culturally and take up for them in ways that are actually awful and do more harm to them than good. But economically, the amount of people that take up for poor white people, it ain't many. It's like Bernie, Biden, because Biden takes up for poor white people. I don't know. I can't name another one. Like, there's people that take up for poor people in general. But the people who go and look at poor white people and say, I've heard Bernie say it. I watched Bernie speak to a room full of coal miners. And he got up and said, you all have challenges that no one else has. How many politicians would say that to a group of poor white people? He did. And I give him credit for it because you know what? He's right.
One more big question I want to... First of all, I just want to say, if you put me in touch with anybody that you think I could learn, that you don't think that I or other people would communicate well with, I will interview any of them. I'm constantly...
I don't want you to interview people. Here's what I would say to you. If you and this is true for all your listeners. If you really want to know what these places are like, don't interview people. Don't even interview people like me. Like, I have a good life. I'm on your show. I've been on the Bill Maher show. I mean, I'm not living the normal life.
This is a big highlight for you, I think, right now, though.
It is. If you want to know, get in your car and drive to Eastern Kentucky or West Virginia. And not to the big towns, drive to the small towns. And I don't mean just drive and look around. Stop in a restaurant. Have conversations with people. Here's what I think you're going to find. I think you're going to find that these people will be unbelievably nice to you. Nicer than you could have ever imagined.
Listen, just to be clear, if we're talking about me, I grew up there.
Where'd you grow up?
Marcellus, New York. I grew up in a cornfield.
I understand, but now listen.
And my mom grew up in an extremely poor, and my mom worked, I actually think that I totally understand what they're saying, and I think I disagree with you.
I love you, man. But when you say I totally understand, I deal with these people every day, and I would not say I totally understand them. I wouldn't. I wouldn't have that arrogance. And you do.
I understand what you understand, what motivates them, what they believe, what their values are. What do I not?
Even though you don't live in the area or spend time talking to these people, you know it as well as I do. That's what you're telling me.
No, I'm saying that I grew up in a rural area, lower income for a lot of people.
So you think you know what all of them feel?
I don't know what everybody feels about anything, but I know what their struggles are.
Well, I would say to you, there are struggles.
I know what their fears are.
There are struggles that I learn about every week. Let me go through the vaccine tour. I'll just give you an example when I did the vaccine tour. I went to this place in Clay County where they were talking about, it was a rehab facility, and they were talking about how the heroin epidemic, the opiate epidemic is so bad in Eastern Kentucky, and they don't even have beds for people. So they know this person needs help. This person comes in and asks for help, and there's nowhere to put them in Eastern Kentucky. Now, that's a challenge that I didn't even know happened. I didn't even know that there was really such a problem that people who wanted rehab couldn't get it. I learned something. My guess is that can be true of everyone. And the thing is, back to my overall point, because we demonize their political beliefs, most people do not care about poor white people. They just don't. They think they're bad people. They think they're racist, and they don't care about them. And
most people don't care about poor people.
They don't care about, well, I agree with you. We don't care about poor people in general, but we, especially liberals, don't care about poor white people. And by the way, Republicans especially don't care about poor minorities. So this is not, I'm not saying Republicans are better.
The only people who actually care about, this is going to probably blow your mind, the only people that actually care about poor white people are actually overwhelmingly Democratic politicians that are advocating for policies that they would benefit from.
I agree with you that they advocate for policies, but then who they and their mouthpieces talk shit about them. They're advocating for policies that will help them. I agree with that.
They pass policies that help
I agree with that, but you want to know why they don't thank you? Because on the same breath, you say terrible things about them in the next sentence.
I don't know about that.
I'll finish with this because you may have. When I was growing up, my congressional district, which, by the way, in the latest census, the 2020 census, if you look it up, the whitest congressional district in the United States is the 5th district in Kentucky, which is where I grew up. Okay, whitest place in America. When I was growing up in the 90s, it voted 70% Democrat, 70%. And you want to know why? Because of coal mining unions. Everybody believed the Democrats stood up for the working man and they stood up for the union.
Yep.
Bill Clinton came around, and even with all of his personal failings, they voted for him every time. Why? He stood up for the working person. Then things have changed. Now, there's a lot of reasons. There's not just one reason. But the fact that that district could go from 70% Democrat to, in the last election, voting 69% for Trump. There's some validity in what I'm saying for that quick a change in that quick a time.
What do you think it could be? Why would a union? I'll never forget asking. I should just say his name, but I'll tell you off air. One of the smartest political scientists I've worked with or been around. I said, this is 2012, Romney Obama. I said, why would any union member, it's hard to get in a union in most places.
You know what Trump did?
Why would they vote against Obama?
Trump took up for unions. I mean, again, Trump took up for unions. The first Republican ever to do it, really. Trump, listen, remember the tariffs? You know who that helped? Unions. That was a policy that Mitch McConnell.
It helped the steel workers union. It helped
iron, and it helped auto.
Some unions. Yeah, no, but why? No, my question is, why did union workers? Why did they do what you said? Why did they go from Clinton, where they supported? Why didn't they support Obama?
They support. But now wait a minute. They supported Obama. They really stopped with Hillary. Most union people were all for Obama, and you want to know what changed it for Hillary? And I like
a lot of them weren't. For the union members that didn't vote for Obama, why didn't they?
The unions, if you go look at
I know that political scientist told me? He said the union voters that did not vote for Obama didn't vote for him because he's black.
Okay, I'm glad the political scientist said that. Still, unions overwhelmingly voted for Obama. It's changed. And the reason it changed is complex. But I'll give you an example here locally. You remember what Hillary Clinton said about coal?
Yes.
She said, this was her direct quote.
Yeah.
I'm going to put every coal miner out of work. She did not say, she could have said, look, we need to move past coal.
Horrible. It was horrible. You'll hear no defense from, she was terrible.
But here's the thing. Yeah. Here's the thing, though. She was in a room full of people that all clapped for her because they agree with her. They wanted to put all coal miners out of work. They liked that message.
Go ahead.
They liked the messaging.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to you, coal mining in this area, it's not even about the economics. Most of them don't want to do it because it's a dangerous job. It's a way of life.
Yeah.
You go to the West Virginia State Capitol, Pete, you know what's out front of the West Virginia State Capitol?
A piece of coal.
No, there's a statue of a coal miner. It's the only statue there.
100% understand it.
So you're not just pooping on them. You're pooping on their, I can't believe I'm saying pooping. You're pooping on their way of life. And we as Democrats, we do it all the time.
So one more big question I want to ask you if you got like 5 more minutes.
I mean, I'll stay. I don't know how much people want to listen to me yap. So,
dude, this is fucking one of the best interviews I've done in a year. No. I think people might disagree with what you're saying. That doesn't, I could care less. I think what you're saying needs to be said. I think your point of view is worth, I'm trying to argue it if possible. When I think there's an argument to be made. But one thing I really don't understand, and certainly like one of the first reasons I kind of really wanted to talk with you was trying to understand like sports media and gender stuff. And like, do they, one question is like I believe that you believe what you're saying, except when you're obviously joking, and wouldn't say something that you didn't believe to make a serious point. But I have a hard time with the like, I guess I pay so little attention. I thought they were the same guy, Dave Portnoy and Clay Travis. Like,
I think they're different guys. Okay, so Clay Travis, I'm with you. I knew Clay.
Can I give you the specific comment, and then you can?
Yeah, go for it.
So like this argument, and Trump made it, and other people made it. But I saw Clay Travis argue the reason why the U.S. women's soccer team lost, or Simone Biles, is the wokeism like that. And
that's stupid.
I don't understand how your social political views, especially as an individual, much less on a team, would affect your play. And also
that's stupidity. Clay Travis, to me, if I were to list the ones that are the worst, he's at the top of the list. Because here's the thing, he's smart and he's liberal. I knew him before he did politics. He was a big liberal. He's faking. He is just playing an act to make money. And he has a lot of liberal friends that privately he whispers and says, I'm just playing an act to make money. I have no respect for that. He's very smart, but I have no respect.
Well, I got my soundbite, Matt.
Well, I mean, you can put it out if you want. He knows I feel that way. Portnoy is just a goofball. Dave is fine. I mean, okay. Dave doesn't care about politics. Dave cares about making money and making people laugh. I don't think he's really in.
I don't even know him. I don't know either one of them.
I don't think he's even really.
But to the question on like the I don't know, what is my question about like women's sports and these, No.
But listen, women's sports and even African-American athletes are easy targets for these people because, it's like, let's shoot at him and let's say this and let's, LeBron is a very big target. Megan Rapinoe, excuse me. They're big targets. It's nonsense. If you were to listen to my show, which I know you don't, when that stuff happens, I shoot it down. Like I take up for the women's national team. I take up for Simone Biles. I went on the radio for Simone Biles right after it happened and said the meanness of these men going at this young woman. It's just awful. But that's why I don't have respect for those guys. Let me be clear when I talk about conservative entertainers. I'm not sure I have respect for any of them because I don't think any of them believe what they're saying, to be honest with you. I'm talking about, you'll never hear me take up for those folks. I'm talking about the people on the ground. I'm talking about the people that I grew up with. And I would say this, my book, I'm not trying to hype my book, but Mitch, please, the reason I did that book, I was trying to decide whether or not to run against Mitch McConnell. I still believe Mitch McConnell doesn't represent Kentucky. And I wanted to understand, how has he won 6 terms here? And if I were to run against him, could I win? So I went to 120 counties. We have too many counties in the state. I went to every damn one of them. And I talked to people in every one of them.
That's awesome.
And in that book, all these issues we're talking about, I deal with. I go through every issue from immigration to gay rights to abortion. And I say why I believe, now I'm not saying I'm always right, but why I believe they do what they do. And I would just say to you, if you really care about that stuff, read it. Because I think it's kind of funny. We tried to make it humorous. But also, I take this stuff seriously. I don't minimize the concerns a lot of these folks have. I take them seriously, and then I talk about how we can win them over. I think it's an important book. That's being self-absorbed. It's an important book. I think it's something.
Listen, I bought your book today. I can't wait to read it, and hopefully.
But what I do is by going county to county, I talk about all these issues in their real world construct. And I'll finish with this. I met a guy there who was a huge Trump guy, had Trump stuff on his trucks, keep America great, all this stuff. But he also worked on a farm, and he had all these Mexican laborers. And I was like, man, how can you like Trump and see all these stuff he says about Mexicans? Yeah. And he goes, yeah, I wish he wouldn't say that stuff.
Right.
And I said, well, doesn't it bother you? And he goes, yeah, I wish he wouldn't say that stuff. We need Mexicans here. And he said, but, what are you going to do?
Yeah, the agriculture.
By the way, I think that is how a lot of Trump supporters look at Trump. They don't agree with everything he says, but then they just go, what are you going to do?
I was going to end it, but I can't because you said one more thing that I feel like I want to just address, which is, I think, a big point, which is where we might really fundamentally disagree, and I may very well be wrong, which is you say I don't take up for conservative entertainers. You're talking about the actual people that you connect with, meet, and go to their communities and hang out with them. And my point to you is there's no difference. Those people are influenced and preyed upon and grifted to by Hannity, Tucker, you name it. The reason they believe what they believe.
Yeah, but now that's where I disagree. Okay. I agree with you that they are grifted by. I agree with you that they are manipulated by, et cetera. Where I don't agree with you is that they're all stupid rubes who can't figure this stuff out for themselves.
Well, come on. Explain to me vaccines and climate. They don't. These aren't controversial things.
There aren't enough. To be honest with you, Pete, because there aren't enough people like me trying to give them the other side. The whole point of this entire conversation has been to say, if we want these people to vote Democrat, to take vaccines, to not dislike trans people, if we want all that stuff, we have to approach how we talk to them differently. That's the whole point of everything I've said. I'm not taking up for the things they believe. A lot of the things the people I love believe are wrong. But I'm saying to you, if you want to win them over, you have to approach them differently than we approach them. You have to approach them in a way that doesn't treat them as naive objects or naive rubes that can't understand anything, and treat them as human beings with valid concerns who need to be considered and reasoned with. That's what I do, and I think too many Democrats do not.
I will let you go, but I really hope that you feel heard and respected, because I have a great deal of respect for you, what you're doing, your whole career, and I really thoroughly enjoyed this to the point that, like, I'm nervous you wouldn't come back because you're a busy guy.
I would. Listen, first of all, let me say this.
Only because you're a busy guy. Like, if I'm you, I have to take opportunities that I think are most worth my.
Listen, on the side, I own a professional wrestling company.
I know. I think it's amazing.
Over there, OVW, Ohio Valley Wrestling. Everybody should check it out. But
I love it.
what you hear from me, this passion, is who I am.
Appreciate it.
It's just who I am.
For sure.
I'm not mad. One of the things that makes it to where, honestly, I can talk to 80% of my audience that disagrees is I don't get mad at them. I don't get mad at people for disagreeing with me. I don't get mad. I'm not going to say I don't ever get mad at anybody, but I really don't get mad because ultimately, but what you hear is not anger or frustration. It's just passion. I have such passion for the people. I would say if you don't love me, go pull up Tyler Childers or Sturgill Simpson, two country music singers. They sing about these areas. They're two big-time liberals, okay? Big-time liberals. But they're both mountain people who sing about the things I'm talking about. Their songs bring me to tears because they get it. And that would be, I'd say, take Tyler Childers. Go take a couple of his albums and listen, and you'll understand rural America better than you did before.
I really appreciate it, Matt. I look forward to talking to you again, and I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Thank you, Pete.
The recording has stopped.
And there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Jones at KY Sports Radio. Please reach out to him. Let him know you heard him here. Let him know where you agreed, disagreed. Let me know where I was wrong and being obnoxious or rude or just factually wrong with my opinion or my take. I really want to get your feedback on that one. KentuckySportsRadio.com is Matt's site, OVW Wrestling, and his book, Mitch, Please. So, great stuff. Really enjoyed it. And guess what? I've got more. I've still got more. That's right. My next guest, who I met way back in the SiriusXM years, has joined me before on the podcast, was in the U.S. Army for 35 years. He retired as Lieutenant General in 2013. He held command posts in Iraq and Afghanistan. His military awards include 5 Bronze Star medals, 1 for valor, and the Combat Action Badge. He is now a history professor at NC State University, and he wrote a great book that we revisited and talked about that was published back in 2015, I think. I forgot what we said. It is called Why We Lost, a General's Inside Account of the Iraq and Afghanistan Wars. He is not on social media because he's cool like that. I'm very excited to share my conversation with him. We sat down at the end of last week. Here he is, retired Lieutenant General Dan Bolger on Why We Lost. I've just told you all about him, and I'm very happy to have this retired general and now unretired, very active historian back in conversation with me. I have great admiration for you, sir, as you know. Daniel Bolger, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you, Pete.
So you wrote your book, Why We Lost, a general's inside account of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, both of which you served in for a total of 4 years. This book was published in, my understanding, is 2014.
Right. Yeah, 7 years ago.
So you basically said that we had lost the campaign in Afghanistan 7 years ago. Am I getting that right?
Right. And I think a better way to say it is it was pretty obvious to me by that point that we were on a path where we hadn't lost yet, but there was no path to victory. In other words, we were in a stalemate, and it was only a question of how long before we quit.
Historians like to, I suppose, military historians, and you're educated at the War College, right? I mean, and
yes.
That's exactly. Do you guys sit around and argue about if only this military strategy had employed, if only this restraint wasn't in effect, then we would have, quote, won this or that conflict?
Yeah, I think that's pretty common in all facets of life. I'm sure business guys do it. You may do it with your broadcasting background, different choices you made or didn't make. I think it's a common human thing to sort of what if. In the military, of course, because there's lives at stake and potentially the survival of the country, we do what if stuff. So, we will take a historical event, say, for example, you mentioned Army War College. It's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Carlisle was actually burned by the Confederate cavalry on their way to Gettysburg. So you talk about disgruntled alumni. I mean, they burned it, and the barracks there was destroyed. It's been rebuilt since, obviously. So we actually would go, even though it's modern times. I went there in 97, 98. We actually went to the Gettysburg battlefield and talked about the Battle of Gettysburg, not because we were going to refight it, I mean, with muskets and muzzle-loading cannons or anything, but just in the sense of trying to make decisions in time, looking at the ground versus what, the map showed you, all that kind of stuff, and what if in it. So I do think that is common. And obviously at the bigger level, we look at things like, the U.S. strategy in the world wars. Did it make sense how and when we entered? The sequence of events. Certainly Vietnam got a really strong look when I was there. But I remember in 97, 98 getting told by the faculty at the War College, hey, don't worry about this, though. This is just of historical interest. We'll never do anything like this again. Ha ha.
So you're pretty articulate about this, but your generation of leaders apparently didn't learn anything from Vietnam?
I think a better way to put it is we learned a lot from Vietnam, and then we talked ourselves out of it. And we talked ourselves out of it for a very good reason and a very bad reason. The very good reason was our volunteer military force is a high-quality force, and that experiment didn't start so well in the 70s, but it has turned out pretty well. We've got a lot of great young Americans who volunteer for the service. Those men and women have brought us a high-quality force that can handle modern technology, that can really do any mission you got. And they proved that over and over again in the latter part of the Cold War and then the early 90s. I mean, big victory in the first war with Iraq, really unexpected. All the older guys, not me, I'm just under this. I came in 78, so just after Vietnam. But all the people who taught me, the sergeants and the officers, were Vietnam veterans. So guys like General Colin Powell, the late General Norman Schwarzkopf, the key commanders in that first war with Iraq, they expected it to be a slugfest that would go on for years or two. They thought it would be like a World War II tank battle, like something in North Africa, a campaign of months, maybe years. So they were shocked when it was a swift victory. And they said, well, why is this? And one of the big things they said is, we've got a much better military. They were right. But just because you got a better military doesn't mean now that you can suspend the laws of military physics, and do things that are beyond the capability of even a great military. And I think that's what we took on with the counterinsurgency, the attempt to sort of remake the countries of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Is there anything that you look back on Afghanistan and say, if we had done this or that differently, we would have had a much different outcome? A lot of people are focused on the Bush administration taking its eye off the ball in Afghanistan and going to Iraq. And of course, you served in both countries. But I still think that without any education on any of this, I have no pedigree in any of it. I have an associate's degree in humanities. I don't want to brag, but if some Chinese or Pakistani soldier was walking down my street and came to my house and started looking through my drawers and told me how to act, and I don't think that would go well anywhere. Like, how could that have ever gone the way that it was supposed to go?
Well, I think what it was this was a classic example. This happens all the time. In fact, you're hearing some of this right now with the difficulties, and they're very serious with getting our people out of Kabul right now.
Yeah.
We've got thousands of Americans stuck there. And you hear people say things. They'll come on the news or come on a show like yours and say, well, we'll just sort of bomb the crap out of them, do this, that, and the other. Okay, well, that's viscerally sounds good. Now it's tomorrow. Now what are you going to do? So you've bombed the crap out of them. And that was the problem I think, with Afghanistan initially. You mentioned the strategic diversion going into Iraq, a way of an overstretch. But part of that is we misunderstood what happened in Afghanistan. Because we had a quick victory, unexpectedly quick, just like against Saddam Hussein the first go-round, the Iraq war we won in 1991, liberating Kuwait. Because we had a quick victory, we said to ourselves, oh, man, this is easy. These people here are easy to beat. We didn't think about what was going to happen next to Afghanistan. Were we really going to remake the country? And by the way, some of the people we should have asked about remaking the country are not NATO or the United Nations. We should have asked the Afghans. We hardly ever ask the Afghans, what do you want? Instead, we said, here, Afghans, we'll write your constitution for you. Here, Afghans, we'll set up your schools for you. Here, Afghans, we'll build a military and police for you. So I'll give an example that any American would understand. So in Afghanistan, we built a police force for them on a model that us and the Europeans and NATO and all this agree on. We built them a national police force in a country where every different ethnic group runs their own area. In the United States, we don't have a national police force. Yeah, I know we got the marshals and the FBI, but every jurisdiction has their own police, county police, town police.
Like 17,000, I think.
Yeah.
Different agents.
Afghanistan cried out for a federal and local solution. Yet because we told them we force-fed here, the great Americans and their allies will tell you what you want. The Afghans were like, hey, you keep handing me a pie and I want cake, man. Why are you giving me this pie? And our solution was, we'll open wider and we'll cram harder. I mean, it didn't work.
What was your role? You were a 3-4-star general, right? You retired?
3-star, yeah. Lieutenant General 3-star. What was my role in Afghanistan from November 2011 till April of 2013? I was the commander of the NATO training mission in Afghanistan. That's a nice euphemistic term for basically being the senior advisor to the Afghan Army, police, and their little bitty Air Force and their special forces and all these other characters. So those advisors worked with me, and I was their commander. We had about 5,000 or so NATO advisors from about 37 different countries. And I had an American budget. This we have talked about in the last few days as things have gone south in Afghanistan. The budget I had was like $12 billion a year. To put that in perspective, I had the largest line item budget I was responsible for in the entire Department of Defense, even bigger than the F-35 fighter or the stealth bomber or submarines or anything you heard about, the largest single item. And that was to not just to buy equipment. We've heard about the equipment. The Afghan equipment isn't super sophisticated. It's propeller airplanes, it's mortars, machine guns, trucks. But it's the upkeep of all that, because we were buying their fuel, we were paying their salaries, we were paying the death benefits to their families, we were running their hospitals. And at the same time, our fighting forces were fighting alongside them and giving them help as well. So it was very much of a stand-up type operation, not to borrow from your title, but we were trying to stand up the Afghan forces. And as a result, in a lot of ways, we were sort of walking along side by side with them. We used to say, using the Dari term, shona b'shona, shoulder to shoulder, because we didn't think they could do it on their own yet, and they couldn't at the time.
Did you actually have, I've heard this from a lot of different people in the military, but did you actually and it's really unimportant, it's just fascinating, crates of cash that you handed out, paid out that way?
No, by the time I got to Afghanistan, the crates of cash phase was over. We were, this was crazy too, but a little bit of story that tells you, we were under U.S. government rules. So the Afghan army needed these green camouflage uniforms. That's what they wear. We had some great bids for those green camouflage uniforms from Mexico and from Indonesia and a couple other countries. But I don't know if you're aware of this. There's a thing in the U.S. Congress called the Berry Amendment that says, and it goes back to when the U.S. Army brought those black berets from China and stuff. And it said, hey, if you buy a uniform item with American taxpayer dollars, it must come from a U.S. source. So rather than those very excellent uniforms from Mexico or Indonesia, which were not super expensive, we paid about 3 times as much to firms in Alabama and all that to follow the Berry Amendment. So no, I was not there during the giant box of cash phase.
But that is an example of what you hear. I hear all the time about waste from the military, and a lot of that's American corruption in terms of who's getting that contract to for the $900 hammer, much less the uniform story. And there's a lot. I'm sure you could probably tell us more about that. But
sure.
So
we had about 30 audits going at any one time.
Oh yeah,
in our organization, and we needed them because, frankly, with the Afghans, I mentioned we brought them their fuel, we did the payment. You know why we did all that? If the solution for the Afghans was to write them a check every month, e-transfer of money, they would have just taken it and given it to all the generals and ministers.
Right.
Karzai and the current guy, Ghani, who's already hiding out with his helicopters full of cash.
Yeah.
Those guys would have just taken even more. So one of the reasons we gave them stuff in kind was because it wasn't as easily corrupted.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be, unfortunately, the story of Afghanistan. And I don't think the long history. I think Afghanistan, was filled with some highly educated intellectuals in the 70s and before the Soviets invaded and that horrific war. But they've been at war for a long time as well. I guess that's part of their cultural fabric, unfortunately. But, what did you... You're supposed to be training the Afghan army, but corruption was so much a part of it. How did you deal with it? How did you fight it? Who did you know to trust? There must have been some good people and some bad people and some, undescribables. I don't know. What was it like, that job?
We found the partner to partner. I mentioned our motto was shona b'shona, shoulder to shoulder. Our advisors and our partner units. So we had mostly U.S. partner units, but also British, Polish, Australians, Germans, in various parts of the country, all the other members of the coalition. So what we found in general was you can judge the Afghans sort of by their actions versus their words. Afghans are just like Americans, just like anybody else. Generally, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. It's polite. It's how you get along with people and stuff. But we watched what they did. So if a particular Afghan colonel, he'd say all the right things. He'd mouth all the right terms. But if we noticed that he rarely went out personally with his troops to check on them, that his soldiers didn't complete their patrols, that they didn't maintain the fire base they were on, that they didn't do the upkeep on their vehicles, it told us about the discipline and stuff. And that's when we'd start digging deeper. Hey, is this guy shaving stuff off? Is he doing something shady? Has he cut a local deal with the Taliban? You get that occasionally. So a lot of it was the hands-on, day-to-day, side-by-side activities. And one of the hazards, Pete, that's happened since the drawdown in 2014, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have drawn down then, but when we did draw down in 2014, we lost those advisors at the low level of the Afghan military. Instead, we were advising at the Ministry of Defense level. Well, the Afghan Minister of Defense is going to tell you whatever you want to hear, so the money keeps flowing.
Yeah.
He has no idea what's going down in a troop unit. And so as a result, really since 2014, as more and more of our forces pulled out, we had less and less knowledge of what was going on. That's how you get to a circumstance where in the last 3 weeks, the entire country implodes and most of our intelligence community goes, huh? What? How'd that happen?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, everybody's got a different read on that, and I'm hoping that we'll get some good reporting and some honest people, maybe some whistleblowers about who told what, who knew what. But I always get very frustrated when people talk about, when people use the phrase, no one could have seen that coming. No one could have expected this. I'm like, well, then you're terrible at your job. I mean, as a creative person, as a comedian, I'm prepared for every possible situation that could occur in this room tonight. And I just don't understand how, like on January 6th, we wouldn't thought they were going to launch an insurrection. They were talking about it everywhere, all the time.
At least from what I can tell, the FBI knew all about it. Yeah. I think the deal is you're supposed to get ahead of those things. Now watch them happen and go, good, just as we predicted.
So, but before we get to that analysis, let's, going back to Afghanistan, what was the threshold of those who joined the Afghan security and military? What were the requirements? Because, we've unfortunately lowered our own threshold in the American military over the years, I guess over your career probably. But I think you have to have a high school diploma. You have to be able to read. And my understanding is that those that you guys were working with, I mean, a lot of them, they couldn't read. They couldn't do things like...
About 85% of the males were illiterate in Afghanistan and over 90% of the females, although we did get some women to school and stuff. Sadly, of all the things we didn't do in the 20 years we were there was put a real emphasis on reading and writing. Do you know if we would have started with the 6-year-olds in 2002, I don't think they'd be buying this Taliban monkey business right now that they're buying. They'd never accept that if they had access to the internet and they could read and write and all that kind of stuff. What we did instead, when we would induct young people, mostly men, they did have a few women.
Not to interrupt you, forgive me, please, but isn't the Taliban strategy always been, and a lot of oppressive regimes' strategies, don't let them learn or else they'll know that we're selling them a shit sandwich all day?
Couldn't say it better myself. You're exactly right. The Taliban, when they were in the villages, restricted knowledge of reading. One of the reasons you cut all the women out, besides that it matches their version of what they think their law says with the Taliban, it also takes 50% of the population off the game board. Yeah. And basically now you only got to control the men. So, I mean, it's very, very cynical. As I mentioned, when we recruited people, the first thing we did for the first 4 weeks when they were report to police, Army, or Air Force training is we gave them literacy classes. And because they were adults, and that included numeracy as well, sort of basic arithmetic, add and subtract and multiply, it gave them the fundamentals they needed to use modern weapons and basically be somewhat effective in fighting. Nothing tricky. I mean, we weren't making these guys nuclear scientists or anything like this. This is just basic, reading, writing, arithmetic type stuff. And that was their first 4 weeks. After that, they would begin their basic training. Believe it or not, it was kind of an incentive. A lot of young people joined, men, as I said, mostly men, a few women, but a lot of these young people joined the Army and the police in Afghanistan because it was sort of like the GI Bill. But instead of getting it after you got done, you got it before you went in. So you went in as soon as you volunteered and you'd learn to read and write and stuff. And that, they weren't getting it in their villages. So it was a way to recruit. And that's how we recruited people.
How come we heard from so many different generals that were leaders, specifically in Afghanistan, over and over? I mean, people have put these horrific memes together. I mean, horrific by it makes the generals look either dishonest or just wrong, which was, we're winning. It was just constantly from every single leader in the American military in the Afghan campaign. Right. Yeah, we're doing good. Well, we're training them up.
As you're aware, Pete, I'm not one of them, given the title of my book, but and I know plenty of generals who didn't think that way. Some of the, yes, exactly.
Here's the book. I'm holding it up. But a lot of generals were quoted as that. And then you talked earlier about people, in all walks of life telling you what you want to hear. Were the generals telling the American presidents and leadership what they wanted to hear about Afghanistan, or what?
I think that would imply, if you say that, then they're dishonest. You gave me two options, and I don't think they were intentionally dishonest. I think they were wrong. I think what I would say is they were optimistic. They had too much pride. They figured that even though they couldn't quite figure out what was going wrong, our great troops, the great men and women in our military, would somehow sort it all out. And, it's like watching a football or baseball game where you can see the coaching's pretty poor, but player talent can sometimes carry you through. And I do sense that some of my peers were in that mode. They didn't really know what was going on. They knew it wasn't working, but they sort of figured, well, maybe if we just keep trying some more, it'll work. Hey, Pete, back to really go back a long ways, go back 100 and some years. In World War I, the generals in the British, the French, the German, the Russian army kept sending dudes over the top of the trench into the machine guns. And they kept thinking, well, if we just send another 100 more, this is going to work sooner or later. Look, the machine gunners never ran out of bullets. At a certain point, you've got to change the paradigm. You got to say, this isn't working. What will work? I don't think we ever had that discussion. I think right now in our country, we're not having that discussion yet. We're focused rightly on just evacuating our people. Yeah. But that discussion needs to be had.
How do you evaluate? How did you evaluate then? How do you evaluate now the Taliban as a fighting force, as a military, much less as running a government?
Well, we've seen them run a government before. They were the government of Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. They weren't very effective. The problem is they're dealing with the same cultural factors that limited our ability. Afghanistan's a country where the people, their life is local. It's their village. Yeah. They don't care what's going on in Kabul. Right. Ashraf Ghani may claim he was the president of Afghanistan. He was the mayor of Kabul. He was president on TV, but, not in some village. They didn't care about him. And they never have. They didn't care about King Zahir Shah when he was in there before the Soviets came in. So I do think there's that. The other thing that I would say is the Taliban didn't have to be better than us. All they had to do with us was outlast us. What they had to be better than was the Afghan security forces. And the Afghan security forces, without their shoulder-to-shoulder partners, the Americans and NATO, they couldn't hang against the Taliban.
Well, you can never expect the American military, rank and file, much less the leadership, to really have the incentive in Afghanistan or Iraq. And we could talk about other military conflicts. You're the historian, but because they're not going to outlast if they don't have a clear, defined mission and an incentive.
Absolutely right.
And the Taliban has a very clear, defined mission. It's their country. And we can talk about the Afghan people and what they might have wanted. But the American military, even NATO forces, what did they want? And the thing that has always bothered me so much is that the American people were told the reason why we had to stay in Afghanistan is to prevent Al-Qaeda from ever coming back and basically planning another terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Dan, with all due respect, that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life, because 9/11 was 9 hijackers, and all they needed was, to go to the Gap and get some khakis and get some knives and box cutters. And, the only other thing they needed, and it's the same thing anybody needs today to launch a terrorist attack or to plan a potluck, is an internet connection. You don't need training camps or monkey bars or a country. You just need an internet connection.
And all that stuff, when you see these so-called terrorist camps, all that junk is just for public relations. They do that because the guys running the terrorist camp thinks that's what we want to see. We want to see somebody going through Marine boot camp. So they sort of do terrorist Marine boot camp. But that's for our entertainment. That's not the way that I fought on battlefield against these characters. I know all about them. Their system would, for an American, the way I would describe it, it's the Jedi Master and the Padawan. Like a guy in the Taliban who's learning to make an IED. The older guy shows him, okay, Padawan, here's how we make the bomb. Here's how we fuse it. Here's where we put it in the road. Now watch me, and then tomorrow do as I do. It's a master apprentice system. It is not a mass assembly World War II boot camp drill. That's the Western model. That's our model, not their model.
But we don't. But to the safe haven argument, like we don't have to worry about IEDs here in Clarkstown, New York. I have to worry. If I have any concern, it's of a terrorist attack in terms of national security like that. And by the way, obviously the terrorist attacks are coming from within in America now. But more importantly,
that's not new. I mean, the biggest terrorist attack before 9/11 was the Murrah building in Oklahoma City.
Oh yeah, before I interviewed you, I interviewed Spencer Ackerman about his new book, Reign of Terror.
You say more.
So, but the safe haven argument, all you need is an internet connection. You don't. So why do we have the entire full force of the American military living and fighting in any country in the world if we're worried about a terrorist attack being planned?
Great strategic question. And so let us get in the Wayback Machine and go back to 2001. So the president of the United States at that time at 9/11 is George W. Bush. And as we should remind ourselves, and I'm not a domestic political guy or anything, but I do seem to remember a very contested election in 2000, settled in a state where the governor happened to be the president-elect's brother, settled by only a couple hundred votes, highly contentious.
No, that couldn't have happened. You're making up a screenplay.
You're all too young to remember any of that. They think, this 2020 election was just. I said, you haven't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
Let alone the 1877 election. By the way, also swung on Florida. But we'll forget about that. The bottom line that I would say is President George W. Bush 43, was in a position after 9/11. He reached immediately for what he saw as the most forceful action he could take. I could make the argument that in the wake of the 9/11, what we should have done is exactly what Clinton used to do. Throw in a few cruise missiles, blow up some camps, send in some secret guys that you and I don't know from a 3-letter agency to track this guy down and deal with it that way. In the long run, it would have been just as effective, probably more effective.
Definitely more effective, because we wouldn't have destroyed our image in the world with torture, with Abu Ghraib, with Gitmo,
all those were elements of frustration when you're using a hammer instead of a screwdriver.
Well, they're inevitable in war.
Yeah. Well, they're certainly inevitable in this kind of war. Again, I was one of them. I'm not a special operations guy. I'm not military intelligence. I'm not in a 3-letter agency. I'm a regular infantry guy, rifles and ground combat. You put me in to these type of situations in Iraq, and they did. What I'm going to do is ground combat. But the problem is it's ground combat not against a uniformed German soldier in 1944. It's in a village where the person you're fighting is intermixed in the houses and all that with the neighbors. And so I'm coming in there with a machine gun. I'm coming in there with hand grenades. I'm coming in there with a tank gun. That stuff is going to create mass collateral damage. All kinds of innocent people are going to get hurt and killed.
But it would seem that
no matter how careful you are.
It would seem, though, that the most important thing in particular to Afghanistan, because of their culture and history, is it doesn't matter what weapons you have. The only thing that matters to them is that you aren't an Afghan. They hate
outsider
invaders.
That's right. Exactly right. The one thing that'll bring them together. Usually they fight each other because all their ethnic disturbances and all this. But the one thing that causes Afghans to come together is the arrival of the foreign hand, and that was us and our NATO allies.
I could talk to you for 10 more hours, but we'll wrap it by asking just your reaction to the end here of this. 20 years ago, we were attacked. The Taliban was in charge. 20 years and trillions of dollars later, the Taliban is back. How do you personally react to that as someone who spent so much of his time, his effort, his heart, his passion there?
I'm devastated. I mean, I'm heartsick. I've talked to my fellow veterans, people and I'm not talking about other generals. I have talked to some of them, but I mean, talking also to sergeants and former lieutenants and things like my son is both an Iraq and Afghan veteran, for example. So he and I were there at the same time. So I've talked to a lot of those people. We've shared what we think. And basically, we know we got it wrong. And all the bravery, all the good things that were done didn't matter because in a lot of ways, with no strategy, we were multiplying by zero. And you know what you get when you multiply by zero.
Dan, it's so great to talk to you again. It's great to see you. It's great to talk to you. And it's been way too long, and I'd love to do it again. I could just ask you questions forever. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Pete. And thanks for following up on this very important story of the day.
Yeah, of course.
Stand up.
All right, there you go. How about it? Retired Lieutenant General Dan Bolger is now at NC State University. Get the book, Why We Lost, A General's Inside Account of Iraq and Afghanistan Wars. Such a good and important book, and I hope you like that conversation. Thanks again to Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio. Thank you to Indeed.com. Go to Indeed.com/standup right now and hire someone new and talented for you and your company and your business. Thanks to Pete Coe on the voiceovers or on the jingles and the opening. Go to Pete Coe VO. That's Pete Coe, COE-VO. And John Carroll, of course, singing us in and out every day. Grammy Award-winning John Carroll. That is at JD Carroll 88. Find out more about John, order the song, and ask him all about his life and career and the Starland Vocal Band. Such a great guy. And that's it for me. Tomorrow, I'm looking to have Bob Saget on the show and retired Navy SEAL, former commander of the SEAL Team 2, my friend Mike Hayes. And a lot more. This is coming this week. Very excited. Big week of shows and guests here on Stand Up. Please subscribe. And the people I want to thank the most are those who do. Thank all of you who have subscribed, who have edited your pledges, your subscriptions more. I do it all myself every day, and I cannot thank you enough for your support. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. That's it. I'm out. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I love you. You're not alone, as long as you're a member of the stand-up community. Bye-bye.
Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand.